Pastors, when we talk about ministering to people with disabilities,
are
these people there in our communities?
Joni mono watie kwedgi kien gang kuja.
Are they there?
Gien gitie.
All right, I heard a yes.
Awinyo olotoni ada gitie.
Now, are they there in our churches?
Ikanicha wakono gitie.
They are there in our churches?
Gibiene kanicha wa.
I'll request Pastor Martin to take notes so that we can do some going around to see how many of these people are in our churches.
Alego la kwad Martin mi kupe meniang joma kita ne giti giana di kanicha wa.
Because I want to put it to you
Piana miata nyak bodwa.
that I want you say yes if you agree with me that everybody needs to be loved and cared for.
Donka ine ye kwera kachel ni dana weng miata ni ke papegi da ke nyuta gima.
Is that a yes or a no?
Le eniti lokada.
And everybody needs God in their life. Is that true or not?
Dak dana weng gimira lubai kwoge enada ke jagopa.
Now, if everybody needs to be loved and cared for,
Don kadana weng miro ne kinyuta ke ma ke dong be ke papegi.
and everybody needs God in their lives,
Dak dana weng gimira lubai kwoge.
is this saying true for people living with disabilities?
Loke eni mono ti ada bod joma gitika kwoke ngolo.
Are they loved?
Gien mono kinyuta ke ma.
And have they heard about Christ?
Gien mono dongu winyu lokom Kristo.
I always love gatherings of pastors and church leaders.
Polkar mar gore makelo lo kwat kilo tela me kanicha kachel.
Because as we've been commissioned to go out
Pian machalo ke min mo dok tij micher wogo.
and disciple all nations,
Kidung funyu dana mai rok duchu.
are people with disabilities part of the people you're discipling?
Adada eni joma tiki ngolo mono giti kin joma tika funyo ge.
So at Joni and Friends,
Machalo Joni kilureme.
our vision of what sharing a meal with Christ looks like that.
Neno wa kitma menyu ako cham kachel ki Kristo ne tie nen kita enene.
In our picture there, you will see people with disabilities, people with crutches, people with wheelchairs.
Kai neno kakan ti joma tiki ngolo mapapat jomo kene tiki odo jomo kene tiki lela me wot.
They've all been invited at the table
Gien wen ki lungo gi chiki beru kwed gi kachel wi mecha.
because remember, we've been set out
Gien wi upo ni wan ki chwal wa mecher wogo kwija.
to disciple everyone.
Wek wa funy dano wen me beru lop kwa Kristo.
So, do our churches look the same way?
Ikanicha wa mono gien machalo man tie iye.
When you go out there preaching the gospel of the good news,
Kai chero ka nyuako lok me kwena mabe wogo kwija.
do you as church leaders intentionally go to families of people with disabilities?
Machalo lu tela me kanicha wun mono chere dogang kama goro tiye.
And do you invite them to come to the church?
Chia dao lungo gi me bine kanicha.
All these are questions I'm putting to you.
Eni la peny ma anatika mine bodwa.
When we go to the next slide,
Ka wandong wa ui vu choj mukene koni.
our mission at Joni and Friends talks about glorifying God
Gien ma wano tiyo machalo Joni kilu reme ene ye me miyo deo bodlo ba.
as we communicate the gospel
Machalo wa tiro lok me kwena mabe.
and mobilize the global church.
Kun benu wa goro kanicha kachil.
We are the global church.
Wana ye watie kanicha magugore kachil.
As we heard from David here,
Kiet machalo wa winyo ke bod Daudi.
he's just told us that we have invited people from all over.
Ena wachi wane wan wa luo dana magu ake ivut peng mapapat.
And our mission is to make sure that the global church
Dong nenu watie ni kanicha magugore mapapat.
is mobilized to evangelize, disciple, and serve people with disabilities.
Ke kelugi kachil ke gorgi wek gen gu tibot joma gitiki dul ngolo mapapat.
This is very specific
Le enitimu keme tutwal
and it's very intentional.
dak bena watimu ke tien lok.
It is important that we note that this is extremely specific and intentional.
Omir wan wanyang ni lok timu keme tutwal dak ben watiki tian lok metimune.
Because most of our ministries out there,
Pian pool dok tij palbama wan wati wogone.
yes, there are ministries that are discipling people,
Ada te jomu ken mabegitika fonyo dano.
but most of the times,
Eta pol kare.
when we find cases of people with disabilities,
Hadong wachume kum joma gitiki ngolo.
we tend to skip those homes, ignore those people, and not necessarily pay attention to them.
Pole dong wan wer geni yak wa wete wa cher bot joma gipeke ki gora ye.
In fact, they look like an opportunity for us to serve.
Ada doy ni li ena eno dong te kar mabe ki bot wa mitich.
We want to go back home in the evening feeling I've done something good.
Mano ini dog down tieno chi wa ada doy na timo gi mama be.
But this is not about doing something good.
Eto le ene peni pete mo gi mama be.
It's not about make yourself feel like you're a better Christian.
Ene pedak ni wer ini wini anti la Christa ma be.
It's carrying out the command of God.
Le ene beru tiu dok tij malo baye wa ne watim.
When we go to the next slide,
Ka wanda kwa cher vot choj mo kene.
I'll talk a bit about the 5 ministries that we have as Joni and Friend.
Amiro loko dok tij abij ma papat ma wan watimo ma chalo Joni ka chel kelu reme.
Now, Joni and Friends has over 20 ministries or programs,
Joni ka chel kelu reme kitiki dok tij makar piario magitimo.
but that is in the USA.
Ento le ene kilo America.
But internationally,
Dong itwok lobo ma papat.
we have about 5 ministries.
Watie ki dok tij marama bij ma wakeme kwere.
I'll begin with the ministry that we're carrying out right now,
Abe chako ke madong watika timo ne kumbete.
which is not there because we are carrying it right now. It's called Beyond Suffering, a Christian View on Disability Ministry.
Petie marokany ento tie ni makaro deno chano la Christa mono neno joma gitiki ngolo nining.
This is a full curriculum that we use in schools, universities.
Le eni tie vukolo ma wan wafonyo igang kwan me university.
It's a very big volume book that we use in university to teach students.
Vuke diet ma watiu kwere gang kwan me university me fonyo lutiano kwan.
And from this very material, we train pastors and church leaders and families with people living with disabilities
Donc ki vuk le eni wafonyo lutela me kanicha ki dong dog gang magitiki lugaro iye.
on how to carry out disability ministry in and through the church.
Kid ma miro ki ti kwere ke joma gitiki ngolo gang wakika nicha bene.
We are very specific.
Wan watima wakema dada.
We want this ministry to be carried in and through the church.
Wa miro ni dok tich le ene ki timo ki ni wakika nicha.
Our second ministry
Dok tich me ario ma watimo.
is the Global Mission Internship.
Ena ye me kemme ki ti dok tich palobane ilo mapapat.
And under this program, we equip students, university students,
Donc e dok tich le ene wa me yoker bolu tiano me universities.
for disability ministry leadership.
Ma kemme ki lok me tich ki joma gitiki ngolo mapapat.
Currently, we are at Africa Renewal University,
E kumkana watiu e Africa Renewal University.
and we use the internship period.
Watiu ki kar me yuyu manolo tiano tika fonye.
It's an entire 1 month long period that we use to train university students.
Tero kira me duwe chiel ma watiu kwere me fonye lutiano me university.
The different disabilities in our communities and the situations affecting people living with disabilities.
Kwa ingolo mapapat ma wati kwere kien gang kuja kidung tekara ngo ma jone gi woki iye.
And how to bring hope to people with disabilities.
Kidung waramo ke lugendak bot gini ning joma gitika kwa ke ngolo ne.
So in an entire 1 month, we are moving around with students in different homes, different organizations, exposing them to people with disabilities and training them.
Ikiene me duwe chiel no watika fonyo ge lutiano kwan ne kien me tikilo ngolo wa woro kwe gido gang kama lutiano matika kwa ke ngolo ti iye.
Our next ministry, which is the family retreat,
Dok tij mukene ena ye wachero idogang wakaro kidogang woko.
Please go back to my slide.
Wadaka dak wako ngej mana.
You've run very fast.
Ichero yor adada.
Yeah, there.
Le
Family retreat is a 3-4 day program
Le eni kwanyi wanina dek unyongwen ma wakaro wako kidogang mani.
where we take an entire family of the person living with disabilities
Water dogang kama la ngolo tikwo yen water ge weng wako.
in partnership with the church in that very area.
Kuno watiyu ki kanicha matie e area le anone.
And to spend time with these family, trainings them, discipling them, and counseling them.
Waberu ki kare mi fonyo dogang le anone mi nywako kwed gitam.
Our intention is that these families are connected to that church
Neno watie ni dogang miru kupe ki kanicha.
and they find hope and dignity
Wek gen gu bet ki gen dak bena gu nong ni ke warge
in the body of Christ.
e dul kom Kristo.
We have Wheels for the World, another program.
Watie ki giwot pe joma gitiki goro.
This is where we give out mobility devices like wheelchairs,
Eno ne ye kama wamiyu ye giwot machalo lela.
along with sharing the gospel.
Kunu woro kachil ke nywako lok me kwena maber.
So as you receive your wheelchair, you as well receive the gospel.
Machalo ine gamo gen woti no itiga nongo gamo bene lok me kwena maber.
And last is the Joni house.
Kidong mi agikine ene gang pa Joni.
This is an ongoing program for an entire year
Le eni ni gen ma woro pe mwaka chelo lo.
where we are offering physical,
Kama wamiyu ye jemi manene kung.
economical,
Kama wa geiru kero me chente.
spiritual,
Kama wamiyu lok me chwiny bene don.
and social support to people living with disabilities.
Kidong no wakonyo joma tika kwo ke ngolo yo mapapat.
This program is ongoing.
Le eni ne bene yub madong tika wa.
So when you go to the next slide,
Kadong ini chere choj mukene matia nyim.
we are looking at, when we look into the material that we are presenting today,
Kawa ngiyo kor ki kor gen ma watika miyene tiene.
we are looking to understand what disability is.
Wamira waniang ngolo mono beru gen ango.
And we are looking to understand what God's purpose then is in disability.
Wamira ni be waniang tampalo ba tiene ngo pe joma tiki goro.
And then we are looking as a church, then how do we start disability ministries in our churches?
Dong beno watika nena machalo kanicha waramo chako dok tich pa joma tika kwo ke goro ni ning.
That's the reason we say why minister to people living with disabilities.
Ene kama dong waneno tian lok ne pe ngo mir wati tich palo ba bot joma tiki ngolo.
I want to take us to the next slide.
Amir ni wachiro i church wa mukene.
Yes. So I remember when I asked in the beginning saying, why do we have to minister to people living with disabilities?
Wiapu ni ma wachako funya penye ni pe ngo mira ni wati tich palo ba bot joma tiki ngolo.
And you say to me that people living with disabilities are there in our communities.
Unu wachi wane kuri jone ni gitie kama wa aye.
And as church leaders, I want to tell you that the statistics indeed say that people are there.
Amira pu wi wani kwet nyuru ni kuri jone gitie ada.
15% of the world's population, they are living with disabilities.
Dano apara bich ikumia joma gikwo e wilobo ni gitika kwo ke dul gor mo ikumge.
Do we all know what 15% of the world population is?
Wun mono ngayo kake wae ni pasen na para bich ikumia noti dana di ki wilobo ni.
Can anybody tell me what do you think how many people those are?
Ngat mo kong
15%.
ramo biek wa ni eni mono intam noti dana di.
Anybody?
Ngat mo ramo biek wa ne.
Anyone with a suggestion of how many people are with disabilities in the world?
Anga maramo biek dana di magetiki gor e wilobo ni.
Anybody think like 1 million people?
Ngat mo tamu gwak ne o million chel mo.
More than that? 2 million?
O million rio.
3? How many? close, but that's a bit more. So there is over 1 billion.
Ke wachi dano makaro billion achiel.
1 billion people living with disabilities.
Dano makaro billion achiel tika kuo ke gore kumke.
You know how many we are in Uganda here today?
Tamane wana di ma wati Uganda tenene.
We are just 45 million.
Wati million pierangwen we are big kikan.
Now you get 1 billion divided by 45 million, and you see how many Ugandans do you need to know how many people are living with disabilities all over the world.
Ka ini pokole erne chidong mini chel menano jo di magitika kuo ke goro iwilogo ne ulo.
But the sad truth is,
Ento lok maliat matia da enene.
of those 1 billion people,
Dano maram billion achiel.
very few
Joma nok total.
very few know about Christ.
Joma nok akin gini mangeyo Kristo.
And very few,
Joma nok adada.
you or us, the church,
Wan eni machalo kanicha.
have reached out to talk about Christ.
Ma wan wa bod gichi wa lok pa Kristo.
So I'm not trying to blame us, but I'm simply saying we are doing a very poor job
Wan an patika kore kumwa enta tika wajane wa tika timu
of
maraja dada.
discipling nations.
Me funyo rock.
Matthew 28 says, go and disciple all nations.
Mataya pieri wa bor waje wane uchero chil funy dan we kudok joma loba.
And we've just seen that when you talk about disabilities, we are discipling very few.
Chidong wanem ne ka dok wad joma tiki gora wa tika timu manoka dada.
And the statistics say that 1 in 5
Kwet bene nyuru ne kum ngara chil ikin dana beach.
especially when you get 5 women, when they stand together,
Tutwale ka mona beach guchung ka chil.
it is likely that one of those 5 women standing here has a disability.
Twere ne kin jo beach maguchung no ngara chil tiki gora.
These are the statistics that we have there.
Le ene kwet ma wati kwere.
And it says that 46% of people who are 60 years and above
Dong kwet bene waje ne percent piera ngwen we bichel kum joma dong ma ko chaka piera bichel chara nyim.
they have disabilities.
Gitie ki gora kumge.
If you make 5, 10 children stand right here,
Ka ini we ko lutina pa go chung kan.
one of them has a disability.
Ino ni ngara chil mo tie ki gora.
This is me saying to you
Eni ana ya tika wacho bore.
that people with disabilities are there.
Ni joma gitiki gora gitie ya.
So we have no excuse.
Yenu moma wageo ki nge wadong pere.
As leaders of the church, our job is to go and disciple all nations.
Tijwa machalo tela kanicha ene mechero mifunyo rok duchu.
The statistics has told us that there is 1 billion people living with disabilities.
Kwet nyut wane dana makara billion achel tika kuo ki gora.
So the onus is on us to go and disciple all the 1 billion people.
Dong tichi ti bodwa mi o bod jo makara billion acheli.
When you go to the next slide,
Ka wachere dul choj mukene.
disability, when you read so much about disability, you find that it has a relation with poverty.
Dong ka iningiyo mod more no ni goro kupe kichan.
In most cases,
Pol kare.
if you have a disability,
Ka ngat mo tiki goro.
you are poor.
Wang mo beri la chan.
And the reverse as well can easily be true.
Dak bene loki rao beri dao.
That if you are poor,
Nika in la chan.
you might easily end up with a disability.
Twere ni ramo dong gikone ki goro.
The next slide, please.
Chwa la choj mukene.
Oh, no, right there, that's it. So, let's look so much about this.
Dong kong wangi le ene ki wang mabe.
Number 1, if you're poor,
Mi achil ka enen inti la chan.
then why is it that you're most likely going to end up with a disability?
Pengo twere ni imar gikone o ki ngolo moy kumi.
As we can see, this is because, first of all, you might not be able to access the health facilities.
Bien mi achil inno peramo nongo jimi mabe maramo gwako kuoni.
You don't have money, you don't have transport, you don't have a bicycle to take you to the hospital.
Chen pe gi wot be pe we ko chweli ot yat.
So if you fall sick,
Dong ka tu mo mari
what happens?
ngati me.
You might end up with a disability because you didn't get medication.
Iramo gi kune ki ngolo pian pe no yat maramo konyi.
Second is that if you're poor, you might easily find yourself in a very hard living conditions.
Me ario eni ni ka in la chan iramo nongo no iti kwo etakar ma te
Meaning you are not eating very nutritious food.
No pe cham mano kirubu iye mabe.
You are not drinking safe water.
No pi pe mar malenge.
And out of the hard living conditions, you might get a disability.
Dong ni wo kitakar ma tek me wor ye ni iramo gi kudong ki ngola ye.
High risk employment.
Dong pe na wa kit mi nongo tik do tek bori.
Meaning that if you're poor,
Tian lo ni ka in la chan.
most times you find yourself doing the very risky jobs.
Polkar inde ber ka tiu tik mogo ma pe konyo madi.
Is that true?
Le ane lo kada.
You'll be the one doing the very risky jobs. I don't want to mention any, but they are very risky jobs.
Ino ni ngate ni tika tiu dok tik makero kuone kama raj.
And then we are seeing that if you have a disability,
Dong ben wa tika neno ni ka ngat mo tika kuo ke gore kume.
you are more likely to be poor.
Tuwera ni ini do la chan no.
Are you seeing how these two are related?
Iti neno kira jo ario ni kien giti mukupe kwere.
Because if you have a disability, then if you go to a hospital, they will charge you so much.
Pien ka ini tiki gore mo icher odyat kibi ngul wil matek.
Because as well, you need to go to hospital almost every week.
Pien ben no mira ni ini beta chero I odyat chochok chabet.
And it is so happens that you might end up without a job.
Dak ben romo tuwera ni indong wa tichirwenyo.
Because nobody wants to employ you.
Pien ngat mo mano mero choni tich peke.
And if you end up employed,
Dong kai rwenyo tich.
they will pay you very little money.
Onyo kake kai no tich mo ki chuli matire dada.
Because in most cases, you come late,
Pien polkar no obe late.
your output is very low.
Tich mai timu beno timatitiri.
So as we have seen, disability and poverty go hand in hand.
Dong machara wa nao ni ngolo kachil ki chan ki woro kachil.
My next slide, please.
Wachero ichoj mukene.
This is a statement by a focus group somewhere here in Uganda.
Le enini ene lok mo majomo go gati kwere.
And people living with disabilities have something to say.
Dak jo magitika kuo ke ngolo gitiki gena waja.
In other words, they are stating that they are the poorest,
Gitika moko kamaleng ni gena lo chan loyo.
and even when they make some associations, people take advantage of them.
Kire ka bed gi guwara bena dul kachil ti jo mukene magitiu kite kale ane menongo gen mabe ke komge dare.
Because have you seen some of those organizations that bring people together and they take photos and they show that they have people they are taking care of?
Undo na yano dul magi guwara dano kachil chiki beru ka mako chel chi donge chwala report ne wano tika guwa ko joma kuman.
And then the next week when you go to their home, what happened?
Icha bet mukene ka de chere gange ngotime.
Because they came with 1 kilo of sugar,
Pien gu bino olo ki
1
chupa
bar of soap,
gu bino ki chavun ba chel mo olo.
1 liter of paraffin,
Guak no motar leta chel mo.
and they take a photo with you,
Donge mako chel ka chel kwiri.
and 1 week later you finish the sugar,
Chabera chel ka dong chuka retum.
and they are nowhere to be seen.
Pede be na wangare mo.
This or that is not ministry.
Gin ene po ber dog teach makati po loba.
We cannot be in the ministry of taking photos with people.
Pe waramo get dog teach pa loba mano wa ber ka mako chel ke padang.
For the 1 kilogram of sugar we just given them.
Pe chuka re kila chel magwa kwa mine ge.
If you really want to give them sugar,
Ka do ne mir mine ge chuka re.
make sure every weekend you bring sugar.
Chabet weng to gitar chuka re ane.
Because you yourself, when you use 1 kilogram, next week it is finished.
Pian ini kumi bene kai tiki chuka re kila chel. Chabet o ka no dong pere.
That is just me saying.
Meno bergira lokaba matika wacho ne.
The next slide, please.
Church mo kene.
I have a few more statistics on disability,
Ati ki kwet mo mananok malupe ki goro.
and it says that 90%,
Mawayo ni dano piera bungwen, percent piera bungwen.
that means if you have 100 people,
Tiyan loko ni kay tiki dano 100.
90 people,
Piera bungwen ki kumge.
or 90 children out of the 100
Unyulu tiyan piera bungwen ko 100.
in developing countries.
I lobe mado don.
By developing countries, I mean Uganda and all our neighbors, they are all
Lobo mafutika
developing.
don charo Uganda ke jirani morumu.
They don't attend school.
Joni ne peke chere gang kwan.
Can you imagine? We've just seen 1 billion people.
Kay tam kwang food wa na ne dano makar billion achil.
And now we are seeing 90% of the children with disabilities.
Dong watiga na ne lutiano piera bungwen ko 100 magitika ko ke ngolo.
They don't go to school.
Peke chere gang kwan.
Even in places where we say education is free.
Kire kama ke wae ne kwan tie mi nono.
Now I put it to you as church leaders.
Dong ana wae ko bod lo tela mekanicha.
When is the last time you went to the school near your church
Obera wena mi agike mai chere I gang kwan ma choki kanicha ni.
and asked the headmaster or the headmistress
Chi punyu airi malo gang kwan na ne.
that I know so and so in the village with a disability,
Ni angeyu ngat mo ti kin gang kan matiki ngolo.
but I don't see them in class?
Ento patika na no ge gang out kwan.
So when we are out there in the communities discipling people,
Dong ka wan watika fonyo luak e kin gang.
carrying out the Great Commission,
Mano watika tiyu dok tij malaba or wa iene.
how are we spreading the message of the good news
Wan mo lok me kwan mabene watika chwala nene ning.
to people who are not educated?
Bot joma gen peko kwano ne.
How would they understand the message that you're preaching to them
Gen yang ni ning kwana mai tika
if
miyo
they are
bot.
not able to read and write?
Ka gen be pekaram wa kwan pekaram wa church.
It must be basic
O miro da dai ne
for
be.
at least wherever you go to preach to people,
Kama in chero ka ter lok me kwana
they are
mabe.
able to understand and receive the message you're
Dano
preaching.
olo miro bet ki ker me winyu dak me jolo kwana.
Now, if that child has never been to school,
Ka dong la tini po o we gang
how
kwan.
would they understand what you're preaching?
Chako nyang ni ning fonyi mai ti fonyo.
Most statistics say that for every child killed in warfare,
Kwet bere nyur ni la tina chel make nego I dok lweny.
3 are injured and acquire a permanent disability.
Dana dek no ki gino red marajo unyo gino ngolo madong bere pe kwo.
This is to say, in places where there is war,
Le eni kama no lweny ti ye.
when one child is killed,
Kala tien mo achel ke nego.
3 of his friends end up with a disability.
Lurema dek mukene ni wang maguno ngolo.
Do you see how war creates disabilities?
Ko nen kit ma lweny kere kwele ngolo kum dano.
In some countries, 80% of people with disabilities are unemployed.
Ilobe mukene dano maramo pier bor ko mia no kichoe gigiti dok tich.
This we've already seen at how people with disabilities end up unemployed.
Wabiru ka neno kit ma joma tiki ngolo tich pegino.
We are employers in the places where we are as ministers, as church leaders.
Wan mukene kany wati ka ber ma olo kichoe dana ye tich.
How many people in the ministry that you lead or the church that you lead have disabilities?
Dana di ikaniche kama ini telo nyo kama ini tiye ma olo kitiki ngolo kitika tich.
Why have we not employed them?
Pengo wan pa wachoe ge tich.
These are questions I'm putting to you.
Le eni man la peny ma ana weko bodwa.
And the statistics say
Kwet bere nyuru.
that about 4.5 million people in Uganda
Ni dano marao million angwen ketona bicheli Uganda.
are living with disabilities.
Gitika kwo ke ngole kumge.
And that was in 2016.
Le eni kwet magitimu magali wario kapar bicheli.
Sure, by now it's over 6 million people.
Kumbiti abiyago ni o dano million bicheli.
Do we know the population of Guru City?
Wan mono wange dano di magibere Gulu City.
Anybody?
Ngat mo mange tie.
144,000 people living in Guru City.
Dano ali mia chiel ki pier ang'wen wi ang'wen gitika kwo isete migulu.
Meaning when we are talking about 5 million to 6 million people living with disabilities.
Tian loko ni ka watika loko kum dano milion abich nyo abichiel
How
ma
many
gitika kwo
Guru
ki ng'olo.
cities are those?
City
Imagine the
kind-
people you see in the city here.
Nugiti adi isete kany.
You need so many Guru cities, and all those people are living with disabilities.
Tian loko ni isete kany jo matika kwo ki ng'olo duwa dada.
6 million in Uganda alone.
I Uganda ti dano maramo milion abichiel.
So people are there.
Dano gitie wako kwija.
Our job is to disciple all nations.
Tijwa me fonyo rok duchu.
So what stops us from discipling all those people?
Dung gina ngo mono magayan wa me fonyo jona ene go doklo lopko Kristo.
I want us to go to the next slide,
Amir na wachere wichojwa mukene.
and we'll look at the barriers for people with disabilities.
Wabe neon la geng mogo majoma tika kwo ke goro gitikwere.
These barriers are in two forms. They are either environmental or they are attitudinal.
La geng le eni ramo ake kaber murumu wa onyoke chwiny madano tikwere kumge.
And the environmental barriers, we all know them.
Ikaber murumu wa ne pole wa ngayo.
In fact, I was very happy, and I'm going to say this to my senior pastor, that I saw a ramp right there.
An ma donya neno ka donya tie mabe ya ber yom.
So for us, on all the places where we come from, do we have ramps entering our churches?
Kama wan wa aye ne mono wa tie ke ka donya mano dano ramo mole ye walo ngolo be karo.
I only saw one person say yes.
Anayang ngara chile ke ti
2,
yen
3,
wiye.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Olu dana bor mo ke wai ne wati
I'm
kwere.
sure we are over 150 people, so.
Enta wati kany ma karo mia chile piera beach.
But those are environmental, the things we see.
Li enu ne ye jeme mo wan wa neno ge kaber murumu wa.
Make sure there is a ramp entering into the church.
Wa neno ne ka donye ka nicha tie ma la ngolo be ramo mol donye ye mabe.
A ramp entering in the place of convenience or toilet.
Kire wa choron bene miru ka donye le enu ben ma chwako ko joma tiki ngolo.
Making the doors wide enough so that when someone has a wheelchair, they are able to enter and turn.
Dugula bene ben ma laj ma ka ngat ma tiki ngolo mo donye ki lela. No ramo donye dak be lake.
Equipments like we see here where you are able to put things on the screen so that people can read.
Jimmy oluma iramo kerone ko a chedano bene ge ramo neno ge kwano.
And you make the words big enough for those who can't see where to see.
Mano nyik loke ki choyo bere madon wek joma ge tiki pera meneno be go nen.
As church leaders, we can go to the government offices and get some services like finding glasses and bring and give out to people in our churches.
Machalo tele mekaniche waramo chair office pagamenta wapenyu ka kiu mo maramo konye joma tiki pera me wang wakelege.
By providing all those, we are eliminating the environmental barriers.
Ka wati mukumeno chinu watika kwanyo jemi ma ti ka ber murumu wa mageo jon ene medonyo.
And this is no government's job.
Le eni pe oberu tich pagamente.
This is the job of us as the church.
Oberu tich wa machalo kanicha ye.
But I want us to look at the barriers of the heart.
Amir ni beno wa nen la geng mati chwiny dano.
Do we all know the barriers of the heart?
Wan weng wange la geng mati chwiny.
Because when I talked about the environmental barriers, it's easy to know that when there is steps, someone with a wheelchair cannot enter.
Ka waje ni la geng mati ka ber murumu wa dano ramo niango yoyot.
So you put a ramp so that the wheelchair can enter.
Ini tuki kato kama lela ramo molo iye mabe.
So barriers of the heart are different.
La geng me chwiny dak ti mapat.
They are the things we think,
Eno ni ayo beru jemi ma wano tamo ge.
the things we say,
Jemi ma wano logo ki dogwa.
the things we do
Jemi ma watimo gi.
that stop people living with disabilities from becoming part of the church.
Mageo joma tiki gor ma papat me bine kanicha.
Because do you know that you can put a ramp there
Wunu ngeni waramu keto ka wot ma lela palongoro donyo be mabe.
and someone enters with a wheelchair?
Ngat mo donyo bene ki lela ne.
But then you as a pastor, you say, well, the one in the wheelchair, you go there in the back.
Ento in macharo la kwarwa in ma tiki lela le chichi bedwa ngej kacha.
Now, are you welcoming that person in the church or you were pretending?
Le ene ni tiga no e jolo ngata ene ke ne bere ka poro den.
We know how to say, this one is shouting, take him behind there.
Wan ngi le ko lok ni le ene dak tiga wo to twal ki chwalo bere ngech.
Do we know autism? The next sessions, they will be teaching much more about the different disabilities. But autism reflects, especially in kids. For most of us, traditional, when we see kids with autism, we simply say they are stubborn.
Ifonyi matika bina nyim wabi neno ke kwe ngole mapapat.
'Cause
Ento polkar wa neno lutiano magitu gi woto twal magiti gor ene chipe wa mini gi kony mamiete.
Because they cannot sit down, they cannot listen, they cannot pay attention. They are always moving up and touching things and doing things.
Kuri jon ene pegi beru mod ne wek gi winy fony no gi beru ka wara tata gi guru jemi gi beru wo bene.
It is a disability, but for most of us, where I come from, you see a parent slap the kid, sit down.
Ene beru gor madong down ti kwere ento kama ana aye moga nena nyur chuki dong la tini way bet peng mod.
But the kid cannot control themselves. They have a disability.
Ento la tini ene tiki ngolo pegi ramo joke kene.
So when such people come to our church,
Dong ka joma kuman go bina kanicha wa.
if we do not accommodate them,
Ka wa pegi ki ker me gwako ge wek go betie.
and we say, push them behind,
Way chwal gen go chi wo ka ngech kwija.
take them to some other room there.
O chwal ge room mo mati wa o kwija go wo iye.
Those are the barriers of the heart that I'm talking about.
Meno la geng mi chwiny ma ber ka wach nene.
We say our doors are open, come to church.
No do go la be wachi ti tuolo bina kanicha wa.
But we say, this one smells, let him go behind.
Ento do itu wa le eni kome dak ngwe we ko chi bet wa ngech.
So as church leaders, we must work on the barriers of the heart.
Dong machalo tele me kanicha wa ti wune la geng mi chwiny ano ne.
Speak to our congregations
Wa lok ki luak ma ge bino kalega.
and all the church leaders
Kachiel ki lo tele me kanicha.
that if you have such a person coming to the church,
Dong ka yin ne ngat ma kumana bina kanicha ba.
learn how to provide for them.
Unen kid me wek o gen bena go beri ken wa.
Maybe if they are smelling, maybe they need new clothes.
Ka gwag nen kum gi ngwe ba mogo no ge mer bom
Maybe they
nye.
need a soap.
Gwag gi mer chabun.
So provide a soap.
Chi dong wa mi itgi.
So accommodate them instead of pushing them away.
Mi aka chwal lo ge o wek go ao o wek gen go betie.
My next slide
Dul fonya mo kene.
talks about how core beliefs become worldviews.
Kid ma yewa tuki dok o kid ma wanayano ke jeme.
Do we all know core beliefs?
One more wa ngayo gurri ma wa chung ye yewa.
We do?
Wa ngayo gurri men yewa.
Our core beliefs, these the ideas that we hold as a society, as a group, as a people.
Gurri me yewa ene obero gen ma wan wa chung dak wa moko macharo kaber ma wati iye onyo macharo dul.
And these ideas, we hold them to be true
Ni kwe look le ene ye wano ye ni ti ada.
about the world and from our realities.
Malupe kikita lobo ti kwere.
The things that are based on our religion, where we come from,
Jeme malupe kidini wa ma wa ake iene.
our social systems.
Ikidma wa nano jeme ti me kwere lobo.
They influence our worldviews.
Gen ge weku kidma wa nano ki jeme bene lake.
So some of the things that are wrong about disability,
Jeme mukene mapete kakar malupe ki ngolo.
they start as very small things
Chake bene chalo gen matitire de de.
and they end up as a worldview.
Don chi dong dogo gen madano ge beru ke nano ne adale eni tiko man.
Some things like people who are living with disabilities are cursed.
Jeme mukene machalo ke nano joma tiki ngolo ni man joma ke cheno ge.
Now, if you are someone at the village and you go around telling people that people who are with disabilities are cursed,
Donc ka ini ake ka bermone kune woro chi wane joma tiki ngolo ke cheno ge yo.
or if this is a statement you heard from your great-grandfather,
Onyo kache be winyo loke ene bot kwaro.
you will think it's true.
In ramon moko ni loke ti ada.
You will teach it to your kid,
Ibi fuonyo ki lutino ni.
You will teach it to your neighbors.
Ifuonyo ki jirani ni.
Before you know it, it will be what that society believes.
Ma fut pe niang mabe no dong dano weng tika mok ni loka da.
And then the entire nation will start believing that.
Chi dong rok chako dong mok ne ni loka karnen loka da.
And the entire world start believing that.
Chi bi lobo dong chako ye ni eno loka da.
They inform our behaviors.
Gien dong ki weko kita wan chako kwa kwere nen mapat.
Something that started very small
Gimo mano chaka matire da.
and was not true.
Ento be ono pete da.
But because you easily spread it
Ento pien ke beru ka nyaye loke.
from your local village
Kama in char ma aye.
to the entire nation,
Do chere rock weng.
and they think that's true.
Chi dong ke tamni loke ti ada.
The same for beliefs about disability.
Eno ne ye beru gien madano bene ge
So, I-
logo
I'm-
ikom jama tiki ngolo.
I'm putting it to us as church leaders.
Atika wachi bor wan lo tele meka nicha.
We must equip ourselves
Omiru wan wa funye machalo wan.
with true knowledge
Ki lok metika kare.
about disabilities,
Malupe ki ngolo.
biblical knowledge
Lok ma lok palo ba mogo.
about disabilities,
Malupe ki ngolo.
so that we can be able
Wek wa bet ki kero.
to counteract the person who says this something wrong about disability.
Mikwera ti bot joma gi logo lok ma petika kare kum joma tiki ngolo.
You be that pastor who comes with the Bible and say, no, this is what the Bible says about disability.
Bet macharo la kwat ma bino ki Bible chi wachi lok wuni petika kare. Bible wachi wa kumana kum joma tiki ngolo.
So that the entire world learns about disability from a biblical perspective.
Wek lobo guchak neno ngolo iyo ma lok palo ba wajo.
Where I come from, we have a word called rugambo.
Kama ana aye watiki lok ani.
I don't know what you call it here. Do you know rugambo?
Wunge lok ani.
And there are always those people who have information about everything.
Jomu kene tie magi wae giti ginge lok kum jemi weng.
Right now, you will say, Mr. Herrick, what have you heard about Congo?
Kumberi ka penye ne Eric iwinyu lok ango ma ai Congo.
And straight away they will start, last night in Kinshasa.
Tuki chak wachi wae nge di boma me Kinshasa kuja
And you
we.
say, my friend, when did you hear about Kinshasa last night?
Tuki penye wae di wo ne chak winyu lok Kinshasa
And you say,
nini.
what about Nigeria? Say, you see, in Nigeria,
Tuki chak wae nge Nigeria kuja.
say, you man, how come you know everything about everywhere?
Ti wae in nge lok me ai ka mo kene ne weng
So,
nini.
but our knowledge of everything about everywhere
Ngechwa ikum jemi wengi ka ber weng.
has to be knowledge that is from the Bible.
Umiru bet ngej ma ake lok palo ba.
We cannot use social media, we cannot use Facebook to spread rumors.
Pe waramo tich ki yamo pa mono mechwa lani bodano.
Let us spread the word of God.
Wan mir wa nyai lok palo ba yo chere kien ping.
My next slide is about the Luke 14 mandate.
We funye na mukene ake vuk pa luka chura ne apa wi angwen.
And I'll ask us as church leaders to quote Luke chapter 14, verse 21 through 23.
Abe penye lutela mekanicha me ya po luka chura ne piari wa ngwen. Tinga chen mi wa der.
Remember, I said, me, I like Rugambo.
We ko po ne wache mar lokani mater.
But my Rugambo is informed by the Bible.
Ento lokani ne ni lok palo ba ye ake iye.
So my Bible, whatever I'm saying, has evidence.
Lok ma loko ne weng
The
tie ke gen
evidence is
mamoko.
in Luke 14, 21 through 23.
Luka pia apa wi angwen tinga piari wa chel mi wa
I
piari wa
see
ngwen.
people with Bibles. Please open those Bibles.
Bible
Everybody,
wuni o yabge.
those with Bibles, open your Bibles. We are going to read this together.
Wabi kwano gina choe ne oka chel.
Some of you know how to quote it, underline it, preach about it.
Jomu kene dong bena ge ngeyu, jomu kene bena gu fonye ye.
A few preach about it, but we all know it.
Joma nako oludong gu fonyo ki ye ento pol wan wa ngeyo.
And Luke 14, 21,
Luka para ngwen tinga piari wa chel.
where it says, go quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town,
Ma waje ne o chero yor yot i dog yo i di boma.
and bring the rich
Chiu chi luong lo lonyo.
Those with a lot of cars.
Joma gitiki mutoka maduong.
Those with a lot of money.
Joma tiki chente maduong.
Am I reading from the same verse you are reading? What does it say? You know, I told you I'm a man of Rugambo. So
En mara ni Bible ni tika wachingo.
the verse says, bring the rich, those with the big cars, a lot of money, a lot of houses. Is it what it is saying in your Bible?
Tika wachimo ni ukelu lonyo joma tiki chente joma tiki
It is
mutoka.
very specific. It says, bring the poor,
Loki tika wachi ni ukelu chan.
the crippled,
Joma giti pegi woro.
the blind,
Joma luto wang.
the lame.
Joma pegi tien gungol.
And the new term now is what? People with disabilities.
Kidung teni ni kilungu kini joma tiki ngolo.
Who's sending to bring people in?
Anga matika wachi ni kikel jone.
Who's sending?
Anga tika wacho.
Jesus Christ himself
Kristo aye tika wachi ni kikel jone anone.
is sending to bring these people.
Tika wachi kikel jone.
Compare them to come.
Utuk chwingi wek gubin.
Do we know the meaning of the word compare?
Wangeyo tian lok mane tuku chwinyi.
When I ask this gentleman, sir, what's your name? Dominic. When I said, Dominic, come,
Ka wae ni Dominic e bin.
am I comparing that person to come?
An mona tika tuku chwinyi no me bin.
Comparing is what? You must plead with this person. You must convince them.
Umiri bak
You
dogi.
must speak them.
E nyuti gini lokane te adagin mati lungi ene pere tek.
The one sending people is not saying, just go and tell them to come.
Ngad matika or ni o chero kel gini pete wano cher me che waj gubin.
He's saying, you must do everything so that they come.
Tika waj ni o tim gi mo ki ken meneno ne
In fact,
gubin.
for some people, they say, you must beg them to come.
Jo muken ile mo muken wae ni chere chi legi me binu.
So when you go to these communities and homes,
Ka wunu chere dog gang man
and you
matiki
tell
ngolo.
people with disabilities to come to church and they don't come,
Chi wajo ki jo matiki ngolo ne gubin ka ni
is
chache
that where you stop?
De giru ka kenyo.
The Bible is saying we compare them.
Bible tika wacho ni chere chi tim gin matim me
So
weng.
you go back as many times as you can, but compare them to come.
Dok chen tian mapul kit matwere kwere chi bak dogi I min ki lok ne gubin.
Because they are the one that is going to take for the house to be full.
Bien adede ni gina ye gubu wego gang kamagi ake iye ni no nyik mabe.
So I can say to us as church leaders,
Anda ram awajo ke wando tele kanicha.
we might go around preaching,
Wan barama ber ka tuchu lok me kwena mabe.
hold crusades everywhere,
Waluo bene crusade dana bino mapul.
expand the walls of our church to be
Mano
so big.
wayabo kanicha bene wego bed malach.
But until people with disabilities are in your church,
Ni kwanyi wang majo magitiki ngolo ti kanicha ni.
the house of the Lord will not be full.
Ot palo ba pa obopong matwala.
These are not my words, we all read them here.
Eni po beru loke ento gen ma wakwano gi achoya.
In fact, when you go further, it will say they will be what? They will be blessed.
Ka ini chera nyim chi waje ni John ni gubinong gum.
So, please, as we go back into our communities and our churches,
Ka dong wan wa do kama wan a ye ka ni
we've
chewa.
been equipped to know what it is going to take for the house of the Lord to be full.
Mo weko ot palo ba pong.
If you have all the government officers come here to this church every Sunday,
Ka inen lu tich pagamenta gen ge bine ka ni chakan cha ber weng.
and this parking is full of very many cars,
Ma inen mutaka ye kriye gi kany mapul.
and they give a lot of money here in front,
Dak gi bulu chen na madon.
it doesn't matter.
En pera petek.
Until people with disabilities are in your church,
Ni kwanyi wang majo matiki ngolo mapapat giti ka ni chani.
that church will not be full.
Le en ka ni chani pe obopong matwala.
My next slide again re-echoes the words that we are talking about today.
We funye na mo kene tie da ka be no lok ma watika lok ye tien.
We minister to people living with a disability because they are largely unreached.
pie mir wa tiu tij palo ba bot joma gi tiki gor pian pul lepe ke o bot gi kilok palo ba.
We say they are there in the communities, but they are not in our churches. So they are there. We haven't reached them.
Wa yi ni gi tie kama wa aye ento gi pe ka niche wa mir wa o bot gi.
And we must be intentional, because without being intentional with them,
Da ku mir wa kemme me chero bot gi pian ka pe wa kemme
we are doing a very poor job.
chinno wa tika timo tij marach total.
And as you have seen in Luke,
Machalo wa na vuk pa Luka
that people with disabilities
ni joma tika ko ke ngolo
are at the heart of God.
gian gi ti ku twin lu ba ke kome.
Until we are discipling people with disabilities into the body of Christ,
Ni kwanyi wang ma wa chako funyo joma tiki ngolo me don Kristo.
our churches will not be full.
Kanich wa popo pong matwala.
I thank you all.
Afoi wu matera dada.
It so happens that I'm the master of ceremony from the other side.
Utimeni ana ye atika dor yuple ene ki bot dul pa wele wa
But I'm going to ask us to stand up.
abe penyo wane wa ayo malo.
And as we are standing and stretching our hands, our legs, I don't want us to go out because I want us to finish these 2 sessions.
Dong machala wa chungi wa tuanye wuno irie tiene pa miana dak wa chir wa wako.
You would join me to welcome Dr. Ashley Mugisha.
Wa don chingwa kun wa jolo Dr. Ashley Mugisha.
And she will be taking us through the next session.
Wek enda ko tewa edul fony mo kene.
We will not sit until she tells us to sit.
Peya wa be beri peng wanga kong en wa ne wa beri.
Maybe we can do some small drill. I don't know.
Nyugwa put mete wa tim gi mo dak wa tuanye fut pa ngayo.
All right, thank you.
Afoye mater.
Now,
Kompeti dongwe.
is it morning or afternoon? Good morning.
Uchoni ni.
Can everyone hear me?
Dan we no
Good.
winya.
Now, I want you to just turn
Amete lock.
your body
We
like
kumi.
me.
Kerata timone.
Let me stand high so those in the
Ayam
back
mal
can see
ko
me.
na uma beba.
Okay? Don't pull your back muscles, just stretch yourself.
Pada ka telengi foto ba.
No injuries.
We are kada enta we ane.
Okay, now I want you to rotate your shoulders.
Ke we pal bu
Like
ka chali
this.
ngwel ko chalo bounce mo mata vordano.
Ah, that should feel good.
Anga
You
ito winya
shouldn't
mamia.
have pain.
Let ko.
Okay. Now take your hands and stretch both. I can't do mine because of the microphone,
One
but
thing
both.
lo ka chingwa er ringe mi ga rio
Okay.
weng.
And turn gently.
We are mod ba pe ki gubu.
Should feel stretch in your arms.
We are mere mod chalo dan ma de.
Move your fingertips like
What
me.
we are luer chalo ta gwelo ngate mo.
Get the blood flowing, but don't pump the neighbor next to you.
Ping wing ngate mo mere we ke malo kono.
Now, that's not good if you do that. Now,
King wing we dan right.
slowly
Mon mod.
jog in place. Lift one foot up.
Ting me tiene cha cha ngwech slow.
Good.
Nan ko keto kuir ke.
Very good.
Eh.
Okay, do that.
Nan mo.
Continue.
Meri.
Yeah, lift your leg up just a little.
Nok te med la mal
Little
manok.
stretch.
Manok.
If I can do it in a skirt, you can do it in trousers.
Una du ro long mi tim ma be ma raj.
Good.
Nan.
Okay, now remain on the left foot and jump.
Ke chung ke tin la cham ko ti leng.
Should feel your leg stretching.
Leng manok.
Some of you, are you on your left or your right?
Uno ka no tio tio mo me ni che.
Now switch to the right.
Lok tin la chuj.
Good.
Tinga.
Remain.
Pie.
Okay, now switch back and forth, left, right.
A de chok lok ko man. Lok che ma chuj.
Now your arms should pump when you do that.
Ko we ara ba.
Very good.
Che te ma be be mo
All
te
right,
kwan.
stop.
Tungo.
Now take a big, deep breath in
Wa ya ma dua tai mu nyong kong wa yi.
and let it out.
Ti kwa to wa cha tu ro.
Do it again.
Da yu ha.
Let it out.
Da kwa to.
Good.
Ti ma ba.
Now you can sit.
Do bet peng do yue ma ba da.
Your blood should be flowing.
Angai rem no ta mo le ku ma ba da.
Yes. Good morning.
Cho ni
Are we there?
wa ti kan
Good.
ba.
I'm Ashley Mugisha,
Nye ke lo ni Ashley Mugisha.
and I'm originally from the U.S.
Kinwala ke United States of America kolo.
And if you ask me where I'm from California.
Ke pe ne ki kone ai kwe a ke California.
That's on the west part of the U.S.
Ti ku poro cheng ke ti America.
And I have been in Uganda for 10 years,
Do ri Uganda ma ka pa kolo.
based in Kampala,
Very capital city Kampala.
but moving around.
Er gi rwen ke to go wa kanye kwere ne.
When I first came to Uganda, I work with Africa Renewal Ministries.
Mo kwa bi Uganda ti ke African Union Ministry ma ke lo ni arms.
You know it.
Nge ki chulo
You
ti
should know it.
Mir be nge ba.
That's our mother. That's the mother of FCC and so many programs
Da FCC e donc lo ni arms ya.
and Gaba Community Church.
Ma ti
of
ga ba
course.
community church ka mo wonu chere ye summit.
And I used to work at Africa Renewal University.
Ano be ti University me African Union.
So Joni and Friends has been partnering with ARM and GCC since 2010.
Joni ke lo reme go ber ka ti University me African Union ke kan ni de me gaba ke community church is a wing.
So a long time.
Donc go ri ti gine bana.
And as my husband said,
Ken mala diet won ata wa ja kwere.
my husband and I, we oversee this program Beyond Suffering across Uganda and Africa.
Joni enene gen ke won ata gi do ti ma ke lo ni beyond suffering Uganda kan ke del chol ke lo mo wa.
And before I lived in Uganda, I was a special needs teacher
Ma pia
in the
bi
US.
Uganda kan ke America ku no en fonyo lu gwaro ti ki der eno ni.
So that is where my background is.
Meno ke ta ana don kwere ki ke lo ma kwa ko ma.
And I would also say that I'm a minister.
En ben da fonyo lok palo ba ma kwira de da.
Before I came to the US, I was a part of a church plant in the US in California.
I California ku no ki chero pero ka ni ja manyuto pong ben ke lok palo ba ko ne.
So that's a little bit about me.
Meno lo ma chek ma kwa ko ma wa nguli u ba.
Now, I want to shift from me to today's program.
Wek da a ke lok ko ma da bin lok ma kwa yo ma tim ne.
So for today, we are covering 4 sessions.
Tien wa ba ber ki fonyo ngwen ma pat me rio ne don en.
Okay? So Mr. Mugisha has done the first session.
La dien mogisha o tio fonyo ma chelo.
I will be taking us into session 2.
En bi nyono ma rio kombete.
Okay? And then our pastors here will be teaching each a session as well today.
Lo kwa rio ne ngar chela bi nyono fonyo chela be dak tien.
And the same will be for tomorrow, 4 sessions.
Dire be wa be lo kwa chela fonyo ngwen pe ne no ne eno ne.
Now, the Beyond Suffering program
Dok tin ma ke lo ne beyond suffering enene.
has 16 lessons.
Tiki fonyo bi chel ma ke ngwere ye.
But for us at a conference like this, we only have time to teach so much.
Ke wa ko war ko man no cha wa ding po fonyo ma pol to twa.
So understand there's more material than what we even have time to present.
Te de mere nyang e jame mo mere nyang ma kwana bung loy gana wa be fonyo tien no.
We would need like 4 or 5 days because it's a lot of material
No me
to
ta
cover.
ne big gini wek fonyo gina na romu ma be da.
So, since most of you are pastors and church leaders and children's ministry pastors and leaders,
Kita calo wono belo tit palo ba mo kain lo kwad mo kain kiti ka lo tian mo kain lo tela kanida ni.
we focus for these 2 days on some theology,
Tian wa bi fonyo lok makwa o kita lok palo ba neno kere jami.
and then we will talk about applicable or the steps you can take to have disability ministries.
Ti dong wa bi fonyo be kitura mo chako kata dok ti kere e kanida wu.
So, in our program,
Yobwa
we have what is called a Q&A session, which means questions and answer sessions.
ka wa fonyo wa bere ki kara ma ke luoni la pen ki la gam.
So after this session is over, we will stop and then we will allow some of you to ask questions about the material we've presented.
Inge fon wa ene ni dong wa be wa ko pen la pen makwa ko fon ma ki fonyo gini.
So if you have questions, make sure you write it down somewhere.
Ka la pen mo do ti chuni cho ka mo kombeti.
Are we together?
Wa ti ka chel.
Yes. We will try to answer all your questions, but sometimes we run out of time.
Chao ke na ger wa karo chao ero wa be yele ni wa ti ki chao ma ti ni ma be.
So please be gracious if we didn't reach your question.
Bet ki je chuni ba ka nan la pen ni po wa guru ko me.
Are we together?
Wa ti ka chel we.
So this training, this
What-
conference,
Fonya ene ne
this is a time for you all to be encouraged,
ti kar ni we ki chok chuni
equipped,
ki mi ni kero.
and also to bring awareness to you about disability.
Mi kelo niang bene wi long makwa ko jo ma ti ki gor bene.
And maybe to sensitize some of you.
Mi ya po tam wa wan jo mo kene.
And I will also say, some of you, we want you to be challenged
Wun mo
in
kene
your core
bene.
beliefs.
Wa mi te ki mi banya chwin wu mo beta pitu ni wa ke fonya man.
But in no way should you feel put down or ashamed. Instead, you should feel encouraged.
Pe wek la wi jo mare ka nan wa ti ka fonyo fonyi ben ma chwini ki cho ga ye.
Are we together?
Wa ti ka chel
Very good.
be ma tak.
Very good.
Be.
So, some of this material that we are going to teach about,
Ja me mo ma be fonyo kombedi ni.
you will be challenged.
Bo mi o banya chwinya dada.
You will be challenged because you hold certain beliefs about disability.
Bo mi ni banya pien inno ti ki tam mo ni makwa ko lu goro.
But some of those beliefs don't align with God's plan or scripture.
Do bi ulu wi pien kita no ini tam ko ni wi bi niang no per wa ta ke lok pa lo ba.
We know that is true.
Wa no nge ni ana lo da.
So we encourage you to just receive and learn.
Ti dong wa chuo chwi ni ye yol chi fonye.
For us, we won't put on debates.
Kwan po bi kele ma chalo chiero lok nyo lar lok.
There's a very specific topic that we will teach about, and it's called healing.
Lok enen ti ke ma dada ma wi fonye wa be luongo ni no ni chao.
Now, I know we have multiple denominations. We have Pentecostal, I think we have Baptists here.
Wa ti ki kanija ma pat kan wa ti ki lu Pentecoste wa ti ki lu Baptist ma ki ti ki fon ma pat.
There are probably others.
Ke mo kene ma pedong wa ja nyim kan.
So, especially when Pastor Nixon teaches,
To twale ke nen la kwan nixon a ka fon.
which is the last session today,
Ba bedong bu dulu ke fon ma tiem ne.
I really want you to learn during that session.
Ke dong twini ke nixon ti ka fon ma ta.
And one of our biggest challenges we face,
Te kar ma tek to twan ma wan wa ke me kwere.
especially in our communities where we pray a lot. Not so.
To twale ka ma wa aye ma wa lego ma tek twale.
What happens when we pray for someone to be healed
Ngo ma ti me ke wa lego pingate mo ne me no ni chao.
and it hasn't happened yet?
Chi ni chao po nen.
You don't have to answer it, but it is true. It happens. Sometimes they are not healed.
Ya da chao ke ne jona wa lego pe ki pe chang.
That's the area we want to challenge pastors today.
Ano ne ye but kwa ma mir tin wa mi banya ye pit wa to twa de twin wa.
And Pastor Nixon is going to talk about that later today.
Ta kwa nixon bi lo ye ya get me phone.
Our response as the local church should be one where we love and embrace instead of repel.
Wan ma chala kan nija mir wa ma ben wa ye ni ginen ne timme.
Even when healing does not happen.
Kere be de chang wa le ko chapo timme.
Are we together?
Wa ti kan yang.
All right. Now, let me begin my session.
Wa da chak fonya.
So, those in the back, I'm main session 2. Yes, very good.
Wa ti phone ma rio.
So, this session that I'm going to teach
Phone an ma be donya ye ni.
is main session 2.
Lo ni phone ma rio.
And this one says, what defines a disability?
Phone wa ni ngoma nyuru ka ma leng ne gor dong tie.
Okay, so for me, I'm going to touch on some disabilities.
Ana be luongo nyeng gori mogo ke nana tika phone.
What are those disabilities, and what can you expect as pastors when you welcome people with those kinds of disabilities?
Ke be wa cho nyeng gor ni ke ngomo mir ini ngi ke te tik ke la gor ma ti kin ngolo eno ni. Ma cha la kwat.
So, before I can talk about those disabilities,
Ma pia cha ko luongo nyeng ket gori eguni.
let me just talk about the challenge we have with defining disability.
We kong dong a wa te kar ma tek ma wa no ke yar ka ma leng gor beru ngo. Nyo ke to wa nyang ke de.
In Scripture,
Wang jiri
you will find words that describe someone with a disability.
ino nyig lok ma yar ka ma leng ngati mo na ma ti kit gor mo ni.
Like lame, crippled, blind, mad.
Cha la ngolo la to wang la yero ding no Bible gero wayo.
So the word disability is rather new in
No.
our languages.
Lok ni gor ni ke le mo ma ki do ma do ni funyen.
Another challenge with disability,
Pa ka chel ma we wa no fonyo lok me gor.
the word disability,
Nyig lok ki la gor ni.
is that it is too broad.
La gor lok cha la ke we ngai la gor nyang e tek.
If I call Pastor Martin
Ta luo la kwan ma ti.
and I say, Pastor Martin, I want to come to your church, but I have a disability. Can you help me?
Ka wa ni la kwan ma ti na mer bine ka ni ni era ti ke gor i ramo konya.
Can he help me if I only say I have a disability?
Ka wa ni ti ke gor mo na ramo konya. Ka wa ko me ka.
Or does he need to know more details?
Eno mir ka nyang ma tut kit gor eno ni.
More details.
Lok ma tut ye.
That's the challenge with the word disability. It's too broad.
Lok man ne gor ni la da de ma ka pi lok ma tu re ye nyang e tek.
The other challenge we have is negative,
Okay ne mo ti kere kita dano neno ki long kere.
and the words we use to represent disability
Lok ma wa tiu kere me nyu to gor.
often take away dignity of people with disabilities.
Kwanyo wara o ke kom jo ma ti ki ngola ma pat te.
In fact, especially in our languages,
To twale ke lebwa ma wa lo un kere ene ma te lok ke.
we identify them by their disability,
Wa luo dano ke lo ki ri ngola ma o ti anan ko me ni.
even though they have a name.
Ti ri nyinga te tie ba.
Not so.
Na lok ke.
Ah, that's too bad.
Right mo ke ke tim anyway.
Okay, and the other challenge that we have is in our local languages.
Pero ma tie kere be ni e lebwa ma wa lo egini.
Instead of identifying a person by their name,
E ka luongo ngate ke nye.
we will continue to use our local words,
Wa mede ke ti en ki lok ma wan yang e lebwa kuno ni.
and we won't change those to bring dignity.
ko wa ye la ko ne wa ko ket ware kom jo matiki ngola ma pat pat
Not so.
ko meno ko
So Mugisha and I were in Ghana.
Mugisha gen ke madame no go bero Ghana
We work with the Church of Pentecost.
go bero ti
Ghana.
kanija
You might
pa
know
jo
it.
la re kunu
And they have an entire ministry to people with disabilities.
go bero ki kar me ti pot jo matiki ngola kunu ma pat pat
And all of the pastors decided to come up with better vocabulary in their local language to address people with disabilities.
ti lu kwan ma kunu ka chiel ko gor do ke ko yer le ma be ma ke gi luo ke jo matiki ngola o ke lu ware kom gi
They said, we are moving away from disrespecting and not giving dignity.
Wai ne wando mo ko tamo be yer le marwata ma ke wa luo ki ngara tiki ngolo pikelu pe ko mo ko me nyo penen chalo ngara don ko nye pe ken dano
Are we together?
watika nyang
Now, if they can do it, we also can. We can do the same.
le lo kwat me gana go timo wan kan be warama timo ne
So I challenge and encourage us today with that issue.
da mio banya kuna chugo chunwa elok man tin
Okay, now, let me continue and say there are some other challenges with disability.
pe ko be tie ma kwa ko lokom goro
Disability can happen before you're born.
inge ina da mo ngolo ma put pi ya ke nywele bene
So, in the medical world, we call that prenatal.
ke bot jo ma ko kwano lok me daktare ki luo ne prenatal
So, you can be born with a disability.
ma mere ke tu ki nywele o ma in la garo chot
But you can also be born without disability and acquire disability.
Edo in ke ramo nywele bene ma kumi yoto ne wenki in tu nongo mere ngolo e kar me doni e kuoni.
So you're not immediately born with a challenge sometimes.
Porka e chao ke ne pe ke nywele ke garo.
Disability can be temporary or forever.
Garo ramo bere pe tu tunu nyomo ke ne gake kum kuoni ma twal bene.
For example,
Cha la bol egini.
you can have a bad accident and break your leg and your pelvis.
I ramo nonga wana ma raj tu twal e guri chi turo chuguni e muo pere o bene no pere muko.
You'll be using crutches and a wheelchair for temporary.
Chi amna in ke bere ka wot ku do pe kar mo ke furi tia chang.
And then you may recover.
Chi ke nene chango in di bolo do.
Right? So some disability is not forever. It's not your whole life.
Yen gar mo ke ne pe riu ma twal gere kuoni.
And here's the other challenge with disability.
Pero mabe kwa ko gar be dak en.
Some disability is visible to the eye. You can see a person that they have a disability.
Gar mo nyongol mo kene dano neno kama leng mai nel chwe ngar tiki gar enini nyongol man.
But there are also disabilities you cannot see with your eyes.
Ngol mo tie ma penen wan po ro nena ki wang wani.
Like when it's intellectual.
To twale ke nendo kana we adam ngat we gar wa ke adam ka cha penen.
And some disabilities are very mild.
Mo kene be peno tiki gubu madak ngene kama leng eno gar tie kumi kuno.
Some are moderate.
Mo kene tila diere kenyo.
Some are severe.
Mo kene raj madaba.
Some disabilities are on an entire spectrum.
Mo kene ma kumi ko duju.
For example, I'm looking around the room.
To twale ke ata ngino yi at.
Some of you are wearing specs.
Atia nana wono keno kar marai wengu ba wai chabani.
I won't point you out, but you can see who's wearing specs.
Logada dene pa be yilu ngata mo malo wuro nana nana ngata mo ro marai ati wai chabani.
Do you consider wearing specs a mild or a severe disability?
Ineno chalo ngata ro marai no gana ti matek to twal ke ti la diere.
Some will say it's not even a disability to wear specs.
Jomo kene wai ene pe gar mo kene ngata mo ro marai a.
But now, if I tell those people wearing specs, remove your specs for the remaining day,
Kada wai wono ti ro marai ko dong ne mo dongi ki ti ki wang nono marai ke wa ke jaba.
some of you cannot even see.
Ti bitu ni angen lo ke mo ko lo ka diet ba pen jo kene neno choj binga no ki wa ko.
See, and that's the challenge with disability.
ena ye peko matie ki long me gwar ma dante kere ma pat pate.
Can be very mild and corrective or very severe.
Mo kene no petek ma ke ramo yoponeo nyo mo kene beri ma teka dada ma boy dano.
So, next slide.
Wachere fony mo kene nyim.
So, we must understand what is a disability.
Bir wanyang gwaro beru ngo.
If you look it up and you Google it,
Kay yenya ke bot Uncle Google.
you'll find many definitions.
Ibi no kita ki yaro kere ki luo ki kere ki yo ma pat pat.
But I will give you one.
An be mia chele kan.
A disability is an impairment.
Gwaro obero ki geng ma pe weri chobu gino mone ma bad.
An impairment
Gwaro eno ni
is a loss
mano
Or-
ini wenye ki mo
or a difference
nyo apoka mo
in physical,
manen ka maleng
psychological,
nyo ma bere itame kuno ya dam
anatomy.
nyo no ki nywele kere nywala.
That's a tough word, sorry. Okay? Or the way the body functions.
Nyo kita no dul ku ma pat pat tiu kwere.
And it can result from injury,
Ma duke na rom ber ni no rep.
violence, illness,
Ger mo timi ku maraj nyo tuo mo mage maraji.
congenital or DNA.
Nyo kwak be no bere wai remo kita ki nywele kwere.
That's the common definition of disability.
Mena ye yo ma pat pan ma waramo yar ke long me gore ko pangati.
Right? It talks about the physical condition or health of a body.
Ramon no waramo wai ni gin maneno manui neno ni ngate enu ngolo nyo ti to wang.
There's another definition, though, that we also use to define disability.
Waramo be luongo ngolo nyo gore yo mo kene kita ambe wajo ni.
We will also say that a disability are the barriers
Waramo wai ni ngoro nyo gore beru ki geng
that hinder people with impairments
ma geo dano ki ngoro.
from participating in society.
Ma weo ngate pe timu gem no kene ma jo ke no ramo timone e ka bere ma wa a ke ye ma pat pate.
I'll say that again. The barriers that hinder people with impairments from participating in society.
Ki geng makela gea kumi mapira mo timo je ma jo mo kene ramo timo gi e ka bere ma iti ye.
And those barriers are usually created by people without disabilities.
Ki geng eno ni no jo ma kom gi yor wing e gi kero e kom lugara.
So we are also a part of the definition of disability.
Ma nyuti wan be ti but nying ma ki kere kom lugara ni.
You've understood?
Unyang
Okay, next slide.
meta nyim.
So for especially you pastors here,
Tutwale wun lu kwat mo ti ot kanye.
those of you who are leading and mentoring people,
Wun mo ti atelo dano do fonyo dano ni.
there's a way that we can talk about people with disabilities.
Je yo ma waramo luongo ke nying lu ngolo nyo lugara.
If you've noticed how we are talking about people with disabilities, we call them people first,
Ke wati loko lugaro kong waluoni dano.
and then we talk about disability after we call them people.
Kong wawai ni dano ya don ke loko ngolo la chem.
People with disabilities are people just like us because they are made in the image of God.
Dano matiki gor kiti dano machalo wan bien ben ki terogi ichel palo ba.
Every human being has the imprint of Christ.
Dano wen ka chela chel kiti ki chel pa Kristo ikwane.
You've understood.
Unyango.
So, therefore, we should also represent that in our language.
Chi lep en merwati kere ke waluo ngolo. Dano matiki ngolo.
When we are talking about people with disabilities,
Ka wati luongo dano makitiki goro.
we should emphasize their abilities, not inabilities.
Merwakat ka maleng kerogi ukat ngolo makiti kere ne yo.
For example,
Chalo la bole.
okay, when a child or an adult comes to your church
Chala ten nyo la diet mo donya kanida ni.
and they have some kind of disability,
Matiki kit ngolo mo guak may nano.
we usually will immediately identify what they cannot do.
Tu chot watu ki nano ki ke gina gao ki timo gina no jomo kene to ramo timo ne chote.
They can't see, they can't hear,
Pe ramo winyo lok.
they can't talk,
Pe ramo lok.
they can't learn,
Pe ramo winyo fonye.
and we focus on their inabilities.
Wa chung tu tuale kom ki gengi gina mio ki beru gar dok lo jomo kene to tual.
And then you don't know what they are able to do.
Dong pe no pingi gina entwero timo ne ma bed de makaro gar ne ni.
I assure you they have more abilities than they do inability.
Atia wajane Joni tiki kero malo ngolo nyo gar ma ini nene kom gini yo.
In fact, if we look at your churches, there's a place that they can serve.
Ke wa nene kanija tika bere malu gar ego ni gira mo tije ye at pala ba be ma bed da.
Whether it's greeting in the car park,
Chao kene gwa ke moto dano kama ke pa ke ye mo ta ki twer ni weng.
it's ushering,
Mi kon lu ngo ram vunya ma bed da nyu dano ka bere be.
it's praise and worship,
Joni ke ku luyer we gira mo luyer we ma bed da we bam ka kiri be no bere bere.
maybe it's serving in children's ministry
Kere wa fonya lu tian be gira mo fonya lu tian ma be no nge kiwie.
or women's ministry.
Nyo do tit pa ma.
Maybe they can lead a Bible study.
Be gira mo konyo fonya at Bible study ma tek.
And in fact, they can even be leaders in your church
Lada dene ne gira mo be bere kin lu tele ma ke tele kanija ni wenga be.
because they are people like us.
Yen kin ti dana ma chala wan egini weng.
Are we together?
Wati kan yang we.
See, some of you will go on YouTube
Un mo kene ka share YouTube.
and you will find a video on YouTube of someone with a disability doing something incredible.
Ira mo nano YouTube kuno jo matiki ngol ma pat ma no ku timo jo ma da.
Like playing an instrument,
Chalo gono jo ma goya gini.
swimming in a swimming pool,
Kwang ene lu ngol mo ku kwang ma won po twer gi bene.
playing a sport.
Turo gi di bane lu ngol mo ku chielu turo ma kwa.
But it's not special.
Ero ene dak pe pat to twalia.
They're just normal people like we are.
Jo ne gi chielu mo pi kita wonu kene turo ne dilo ene be dak pe pat do.
Are we together?
Wati kan
Good.
yang.
Very good. I've made my point.
Log ma leng anu ba.
And when you're not sure what to say or what to do,
Tapi ti nge no geno mere white nyo geno mere tim
always ask them,
pengi ko ye
how can we accommodate?
in man waram kete ka kwe maram ti ye mabe
What do you need to come to church regularly?
pingo gware mar bine ka ni de tere
Do you need someone to push you in your chair?
ai tam ni ngar mo mer ko ko chor ke do gola me do alega
Maybe they have a visual impairment, so they need someone to walk with.
chao ken no wa pe ner mabe me te ki tele ki wot kwere
Maybe they have an intellectual or mental disability.
chao ken no pe pati wa ya nget kan pe tam mabe
So they need you to give them a buddy at church.
chi no ki mero ne ki no ngi ka be mo ka ni ja mabe.
So when in doubt, we ask what the needs are. We don't assume.
Mero wa pengi po wa biara ne la gar ne mero gine ene.
So turn with me to Ephesians 4.
Kono wa loka woni book pa jo e pe jo chura ngwen.
Okay, Ephesians 4, verse 29.
E pe jo chura ngwen tienge piari o bu ngwen.
Okay, I have it here, so I'm going to read it.
Ene be kwano be.
We should guard what we say,
Mero wa gwa gen ma wa wajo.
speaking only what is helpful
Kun wa loko gen ma konyo ki ken.
for building others up
Maramo geto jo mo kene ki chung.
according to their needs,
Malo pe ki gen ma ki mero.
that it may benefit those who listen.
Wek jo ma winyo gi gunong kon ma aki ye.
Does someone have a Bible in a trolley?
Dan ma ki Bible ma ke gore leba chulitia.
with them now. Can you please read Ephesians 4:29 out loud?
Ke kwan ni wa ke leba chuli do e pe to
Very
chura
loud.
wen.
Very loud.
Kwan man lo de ke gi lo kan ni. Wo ya ti wa ngai da. Ya ko.
Are we together?
Wo wi ni ma be.
Have we understood the scripture?
Wa nyang tieng jiri ni we.
All right.
Be.
Good. Now, keep the slide here. Don't change it yet.
Wa kong kinu chungu male marai kenyo.
Now, let me shift to talk about specific types of disabilities.
Wa don wa ko bo lo kom kit ngol ma pat pat.
If I were to ask our pastors and leaders here,
Kene apen lo kwat ke lo tela ma ti kanye.
what are the top 3 disabilities in Africa? The categories of disabilities. Do you know what they are?
Gara dekat dula dekat di ma ti del chol ma wunu ngai ma be ada da mano.
There are many disability categories, but do you know what the top 3 are for Africa? This is not a trick question.
Gara dek ma wan lo del chol wa ngai ma be ada da ni.
Does
Yes, ma'am.
anybody know? Just you can say it out loud.
Ke ngate mo ngai gera il chi mare waj ma lo.
Yes, please.
O men wa waje.
Can just say it.
Waj ma lo ke gi lok ai na ye.
Praise God. One is physical,
Good.
then sensory,
Okay.
mental.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I know.
Very good. Now, if I were to break it down by what he just said, we would say physical,
War ma nen kom
hearing,
winyu
visual.
ke men neno.
That's the sensory word you heard.
Ma dek ma pe kita.
And then after those 3 is what he said, which is intellectual or mental.
Okay,
That's our 4th one. But those 3 categories are the top 3 most common in Africa. What are the top 3 most common disabilities in Uganda?
Adek gara dek Uganda mo yuek ma danu ngai engo. Nyo ngola dek ma dong danu ngai Uganda.
It's not a trick question, and the answer is it's the same.
La game meri Roma kana la penya ye
It's
ani
the same as Africa.
Roma ke del chola la me Uganda chi wun wi wutu lingo.
Are we together?
Ti ka ling.
And what are the top 3 most common in the northern region of Uganda?
Ka da ka tue da ka mer manok ne gara dek adi ma ke duo no dan Uganda kan ma wun ngai yo.
What do you think the answer is?
Da ka be kwala en pe.
Yes, and then what follows after physical?
Gar ma nen.
You guys say mental, and what else?
Mo ke ne ko gar me wich.
Visual and
Gar
hearing.
ma neno
Very
ke me winyu
good.
lok.
And yet there are other disabilities that we still need to do a lot of sensitizing about,
Ti gore mo ko ma fun mir ki fun dan wek bu ngai ma be ba.
like autism spectrum disorder.
Tu twale mo ne ma ke wa ngare mo no pe be mo ti ko chepa ta gara no pe nen ne.
And there's also different types of mental or intellectual disabilities that exist.
Gar mo be futi wi dan ma put po niang ba no kit ko ngata pe niao dano.
Not so.
Un po ta mo be ne ne gar ba wai me ne nyeru ti
And,
active.
and there's even specific disabilities that you find just in Gulu and South Sudan, like, or I should say the North, like nodding syndrome.
Ti gar mo ko man no ti tung kanye ken no Sudan chalo tu lu lu gini. Pe no ka mo ken ata.
So now, I don't think I need to ask you this, but I think we all have an understanding of why there's a lot of physical disabilities in the North.
Pange ke mira pen la penye kene a pen pingo gar ma ko me nen ni kung kung tuong to twal tung ko malo kan.
Why are there physical disabilities here?
Pingo ngolo ma ko me nen te duong ko malo kan.
What is it? The effects of war.
Adu ke me
That's
lueng
it.
be na ke lu ngolo ma pol.
Same with visual, same with hearing, and same with intellectual, especially if they get a traumatic brain injury.
Yo mo kene no ko no wana wigi chi dong kelo bene gwaro en ka lwenye.
And then you heard about Mugisha talking about poverty, war, how it relates to
Waneno
disability.
keta lok me chan ke gwaro ke wor ka chiel kwede ke mon na chiel tie a chiel beno tu kan na chok tu.
So, for this session, I don't have enough time to cover every disability.
Fuon wa mario ne cha wana ding po ram lok lokum gorio weng.
So, I'm going to assist you with talking about physical, visual, and hearing.
Chi da bit loko ko ma dek ken gwar manen ke me winyu lok ke nano.
But I understand there's intellectual disabilities, there's autism,
Anyang e gwar me witie ki gwar ma en wer da pe ber mod no da ber chepa da ta jo ken pe ber da ke bi no amal wor ko ni.
and there's other things like mental health issues.
Ti ken tie cha me tuo wit.
We don't have time to even cover all of those.
Te go ni dong cha wa ding po be donye ye.
So, my friend in the back, if you can find the slide that says physical disabilities.
E rom ter wa slide ma ke choy ni gwar manen ne kung kung.
Thank you. So, a physical disability limits or restricts a person's physical movement.
Gwar ma manen ni ge da no timu gin manen ne kung kung bene o.
Okay, or their ability to endure, like stamina or endurance.
Ker man me jiu kumi nyo chuni no peke.
Okay, a physical disability can be temporary,
Gwar me kombe rom be tunu tunu.
meaning you have it and you fully recover.
Ma rom be tie chi ruenyo e kar mo.
It can also be permanent.
Gwar me kom mo go be gako matwal.
A physical disability can also fluctuate, which means it comes and it returns and then it goes.
Gwar mo go tie ma gi lima lima nane welo. Kar
Ane-
kene tuj ruenyo dak bino limi bene.
An example of a fluctuating physical issue could be from a health condition.
Mo kene la bolle beru chalo peko me yot kom ma bino dak.
Like someone with high blood pressure or diabetes.
Kene tiki tuo chukare nyo high blood pressure gine ene bino kar kene beru pe.
You've seen those where their legs or feet or ankles swell
Jo kene tien ki kuoto
and they can't walk.
ke kar ma tien o kuot no perang wot.
They may need a chair for 3 months.
Due dek mone kong no lor ki kom.
They take medication, physiotherapy, and it goes away.
Monyo yat ke rueyo gi chikini to.
But then 6 months later, it comes back.
Chinge due bichel no dak gino dugo dak dugi wi kom.
Right? So that's fluctuating.
Ene ni no ile dugo.
Physical disability can happen from an injury,
Romo a ke rep
violence,
tim ger me luen maraj.
illness, or sickness,
Wo mano bino di ma da ko karo ker ni o.
an accident.
A wana me guri gi eno.
It can be genetic.
Mo ko kinywele ke ranywale remoni.
And sometimes there's no understanding for the physical disability.
Chokene be niang gwar me kome ngai widano.
So some of these physical disabilities that we see can be from amputation.
Mukene a ke nen ke ngolo berio nyo ke ngolo tine ngola dana ino ngolo kere.
Where a limb is surgically removed.
Mukene ke chere kwanya ke oriat.
Sometimes they are born without a limb.
Jo kene mere ke nywalo ke o no dul ko manu rem.
So it could be a bone deformity. I don't know how to say that local.
Ano ni ke lebe chuli no ro ngai niang te ko karo da ke.
Sorry. Another common physical disability we see is called club foot. You know club
Okay,
foot?
Tiene. Tien cha no gota gwele ja gule ja tien diel ma da pe be dong dano ko lo.
Yes, where the foot
Kene wor ke ngai
is
tien.
inward and twisted in the ankle.
No tiene como ke ga cha fuene kuja.
The bones are not straight.
chogo no kwa dong ke me no dong ke do chor gum.
By the way, club foot can be preventable or treatable and manageable before it is permanent.
Tuo ane ke ramo dor neo yo pe be ke nan no pe ri.
But once they reach a certain age, it's permanent.
Ke mo ka mo no o ma pe jo gang wo te ro yat ki yo wo dong ga ko matwan.
And by the way, many of the disabilities are preventable,
Pol garo egini genge.
not just physical.
Pe garo en mer me kom ke kane ba.
But you remember what Mugisha talked about
Unge gana mo ke so fon ma chel we.
with poverty,
Lok me chan.
lack of health systems, medications, vaccines.
Ke ariat ma be no pe twero ye ke yan ma be ma pe ramo no gini.
Also, it can be lack of awareness about the disability.
Chao kene bene no ngej pere kom kwar mo ne matia nyote ko pa dano ni.
But most of these are treatable before they are permanent.
Gori goro igini no kar ke ramo gengo ge ke ni ai kom ge chon ma pia go la ko du yo ma tek ma tong pe change.
Another very common disability is cerebral palsy.
Mo ne tie ke luone tua ngep
Cerebral or cerebral palsy.
cerebral palsy.
Yeah, you can say it like that.
Timot le to ni. Dingedan.
So let me just
Burung it.
describe what it is. Cerebral palsy is actually first damage to the brain.
Tuo ane ke wa kom bala dame ba.
Okay, so a part of the brain that controls movement
Vot wi mador ke dano wor ke ni en kwan lo ni ye.
then causes physical.
Chidong goar ne bino nan no ke komi.
So here's an example.
La bole en bunyor.
I'm standing here talking to you,
An en a chonte lokwedwo.
and as I'm talking to you, I am breathing in air,
Matia lokatia yue no yamo.
I'm swallowing my saliva.
Atia monyo lana ma bebe ne.
How does my body know to do that?
Koma mano nge ne mere tim jeme ego ni wang ni ning.
Your brain tells your body to do it because
Adama
there's
ye-
no injuries.
Adami en wai ne tim gine ni.
But when you have an injury here,
Te pero monyo red mo char magadam wi.
it prevents some of our parts from working.
Char che ballo ke dul ko mo ke petiu ma be.
That is why you see people with cerebral palsy drooling.
Tu nan jo ke ne la mol ke dog ge ke pero te adam ge.
Are we together? So part of the brain can't tell them to do what? Swallow.
No vut wi ma no mer wa chi mon lao ni pero mo wa cho ne la mo lo ke ne wa.
And they may even have some paralysis,
Jo ke ne kom ki kweo.
right? And so the body can't tell the arms and bones to stretch and move.
Chidong no adam pero wa ni le ko mun wek chin ko riene kon ke dol do.
It's why we see their limbs twisted.
Chinano chinga de be charu kango.
Are we together?
Wati ma be.
So it starts in the brain with cerebral palsy before it's physical.
Pero ene chake ke adam no dor je me komi.
Okay, and okay, that's all right. And another common one is called hydrocephalus.
Kwar mo kene be tie mano pi pongo.
What is hydrocephalus? What does hydro mean?
Hydro ke wa hydro won yang ko ja.
Water.
Mano pi.
Yes, water.
Hydro no
Right?
pi.
Or fluid.
Yo gimoma pige.
Right? So hydrocephalus is when the head becomes very big and filled with fluid.
Tu ene wer wi pi pongo dari wi ye.
Have you seen that?
Unan ko jo ma pi pongo wi gini.
Yes, it's there.
Tu ene tie.
And you ask, how did it happen?
Chidi penye ni ene da ko time ni ning.
What happened? Why is their head so big?
Pingo wi da ko kwat ma dira ta.
First of all, it is treatable.
Kuma be ni kiramo terne oriat.
You know Mbale side in the east.
Tu mo bale kacha.
You know there.
Ungai mo bale.
There's a big hospital called Cure International Hospital.
Ya orian mo te kono ki luan ngo. Kiwa
Kiwa.
International. Ki mbale.
They specialize in treating brain problems, head problems, including hydro.
Jo ma kono ne ki nge lo ko madam ki ti je ma ma wi dan ma be chi chango.
And a doctor can put what they call a shunt.
Dakta promo kato
Shunt.
nyo mo nyo wire mo wi ka.
The shunt drains the fluid out of the brain or the head.
Chi wire ne wire gi ni apa la. Pipe anda ka wire ne wire. Tim ki ja ba. Orom kar ni ru kwa nya la kwa nya.
Now, why is this important for pastors to know these things? Because you will find these in your community.
Pengo ba fo nya man pien ki tuo ni bino ka kama iti ka kwa te ye ni.
And you need to have some education and understanding about those disabilities.
Ti dong mir no be ti ngej mo ke nyang e kom gori ego ni.
Because some of these families will come to you before they go to the hospital.
Pien lu kristai ne kong ki bino pini ma pia go chera oryat.
And you need to know how to care for them and direct them for medical attention.
Ti no mir ni nge ke dong ke obori wa ne tuo ne ene ne pe mero la ke ri ke te o mu bale mer ke le adi.
Are we together on this?
Wan yang ana we lu kwat.
This is not just the hospital or a doctor's responsibility. As a church, we must also know how to direct people to get help.
Ene no pe mero daktere ken ke oryat ye go wa ke ter mu ba lu kwat be mer ku nge ni ka tuo ma ko man tie ke ter oryat kwene.
Now, for hydrocephalus,
Pe tuo en ma we ko bidan pong kwat ma diete.
you might ask, how did fluid build up in the head?
Irong pe nya we dak pi cha ko pong wa wi dan ning.
So I want everyone to take your left or your right hand.
Ke yil
Raise
chi
it.
La chut nyo la
Now
cham.
put it directly behind your neck.
Ket ko mak to ki kong.
And I want you to feel for a bone that is sticking out and it's bony and pointy.
Choko mo ne ti dinge ke yo bero chala
It's
gun
the
gun
bottom of your neck.
e bong choko en mu gun dinge.
Have you found it?
Ino choko mo ke nyo.
What is that?
En
Your spine.
en o giro nge dia.
It's your spinal cord, and your spinal cord goes all the way down your back.
Choko en o
can
ria
feel
mere.
it.
Bino mere we piere ka e.
Sticks out. It's bony.
O bino ka en choko ke kan ya per rio mo ti ye. Bino.
Now, someone with hydrocephalus usually does not have a developed spine.
Jo en ma pi po wi gi ni no giro nge ke choko nge gi ni kar no ngo. O da.
And if I ask you, what is in the spine? What's in there?
Ka pinye ni ngo ma biro ye o giro nge chi.
It's not just your bones.
Choko
What
en
is there?
ngo ma biro ye che.
There's fluid.
Gi mo ma pike pike de kunu.
Spinal fluid is in there.
Luone ugiju nge. Gina mo te ye magwa ko nge dan kunu.
And it keeps your body moving.
Konyo we kumu bet ka wot ma be.
And so what happens when you don't have a spinal cord? It goes where?
Ke do giju nge pere ma kun biro ma wa to wa ya damini.
It has nowhere to go, so it goes up into the head.
Ke ando kwar kupe o chi jemu ka ne ki don ki long dok ki dok ko ma lo.
Are we together on this?
Wati an yang.
Do you know what we call that disability? Where you don't have a properly formed spine.
Ke o giro nge pe o nge ning tuo ne ke ki luo ke re nyo po mo po da ma be.
There are many of these cases here in Uganda.
Tuo ne ti duo Uganda ba.
What? Very good, I heard it. Spina bifida.
Ki luo ne kon spina bifida. Ki le mo. Ke le chure wute wa tuo lo ba.
Okay, and there's many associations and parent groups and organizations that advocate for people with spina bifida.
Ke pero me tuo dinge tie o giro nge tie lu yot ko magiti ye ma be Uganda kan.
In most cases, hydrocephalus, they also have spina bifida.
Jo en ma pi po wi gi ni pero me o giro nge be yelo gi.
And the hydrocephalus can be treated and fluid can be drained.
Tuo en ma kwar widane kara ke ramo chao na ne wo ke no yat mo pore.
So it's treatable.
doctor ra mo konye ye
Now, spina bifida is permanent.
en me ugiro ngete dak wi right bero do matwal ke mari
Okay? And now I just want to share with you a common disability that is physical that we see in the Bible. You may know it called leprosy.
gwar mo kene tie ke cha nye bible ni dobo en nano
Some of you don't think leprosy is there.
uno kene be ponge wa dobo be potan ni dobo mo tie
You know, leprosy is still there.
ni tuo do fu tie ba
And there are outbreaks of leprosy across Africa.
tuo do be para chalo tuo mo kene ni
You know, leprosy can cause you to lose your fingers,
tuo ni ro we ko en ruenyo ni chio
parts of your hand, and your feet.
ke dak ngweje be ro mak we ruenyo luere o ruenyo luer mo kene remo
Still a very common physical disability.
fut gwar me kom mati matek be kin dano
And now, the final physical disability I want to talk about is called spinal cord injury.
ma gik ma da be lo ye en ke luone awano ma ma ko gero ngai
You know spinal cord injury.
ngeo red mo ma no ma ko gero ngai dan kanya
It's not spina bifida.
en petuo ba
That's a different one.
en dak pa
Spinal cord injury is when you have some sort of accident or injury to your spinal cord and your vertebrae separate or break.
kenen ino awano me guri nyo tim ger mo tim kume ti ger ngai ni gwa mo ke toro nyo ke gwenyo line ne pe do chuan ti ke ta miro chung kere
And it can happen on any of the vertebrae you have. You have many behind here.
chogo gero ngai ti rie ma pul ma mo ke ken ke ramo gwenyo ke to chung kere o ka kare
So, since I'm talking about spinal cord injury,
ke to cha ta lo ko wano ma ma ko gero ngai dano ni
I want to share with you the story about Joni Erickson Toda.
amira nywa do mama kwa ko Joni Erickson ke toda
Joni is the founder of
Joni ayo cha ko lok me Joni ke lo reme
Joni and Friends.
Joni ke lo reme eno cha ko
So you might be wondering, what is the history on Joni and Friends? Who are they? What happened? Why does this ministry exist? Those questions.
pingo ke luone Joni ke lo reme dok ti chu cha ke ni ning irong penye bene
Joni Erickson was 16 years old
Joni Erickson no ma ne te par bichel
when she went out for a swim.
chu char ka kwang
You know swimming?
ungi won kwang we
In the lake?
pi nam ko ba
And you know the lake levels, they rise and they...
e pi nam gi yile malo ke yam yo dok ko pi
Sometimes the water is very deep and sometimes it's very shallow.
pi ni chao ka ne pong chao ka ne duono
In fact, you have to monitor the levels.
miri bet queen ka nano ka piu pongo nyok wang e pi ti duon
Joni went out for a swim.
ti Joni u charo ka kwang
She wasn't monitoring the lake levels.
en no pete nano kono piu ponga tek nyo dak
And the lake where she would swim is usually very deep.
pi cha ma no ke kwa ye no tura da
But when she went to dive in, the lake level was very shallow.
cha ma en charo ka pie piri no futi la ping
And she was out on those wooden docks where you tie your boats.
no tie doge kono ka me twe ye ni
And they stretch out into the water, those wooden pieces.
ti do donya ke pi ni
She walked out onto the dock and dove head first
ti ma o kono wie yo kwa
into the lake.
donya e pi
And again, she thought the water was deep, but it was shallow.
en no ta pi ti la mal kar pi no dak ko pi
And she knocked her head on the lake floor.
ti charo yo ko wie wa ping te nam ke nyo
And she instantly severed her spine.
ti pe ko ne no charo ma ko gir nge yo mo yo ko wie ma tek
So you can have an injury to the head that affects the spine.
Ini ramo yok wi matek che chero ma ko ger nge pe na dak bin we dinge kan.
And she became paralyzed from the chest down instantly.
Chi utu ge ngol ko mo kweo cha ke kor kan wa ping kweo me ne beleke.
And she could not move her arms and her legs.
Cha eno ro pe ramo yile chi wa tiene wen pian do kweo.
And she began to drown in the water.
Chi do cha ko mon me de ai pi eno ne bene.
And her sister was there on the shores of the lake collecting seashells.
Chi no la mene ti ka cha ko me ro kor mo ko ke teng nam.
And the stones, the pretty stones.
Ke gwen mo ko mano pi pier wa mano rienya neno mete.
She wasn't paying any attention to Joni.
Pa be ti apar pe la mene pen jui kwang ke we du ko yo.
She did not see Joni drowning.
O neno ni la mene munyo.
And Joni was face down in the water.
Chi dong Joni no do kulu wiyo te pi.
So she couldn't shout.
Be peramo dange we ko non kon.
And her sister was moving around.
Madong la mene ti awor ngat pi.
And I don't know what they call these here, but you know those little orange creepy things with claws
Atura mo ko ke ye mo ko mer ma no la ka pi ni.
and legs? We call those crabs.
Ke leb ke luone crabs. Gore
A crab
a crab. Gore.
bit Johnny's sister's toe.
Chi ko ano kai luet la men Joni.
And the sister screamed in agony.
Chi ano dange karem.
And she said, I must warn Johnny that when she swims back to watch for the crabs.
Chi wai do mera danga luong la mera we ke ti akwang ko gwa ke ko gore ma kai dan ni.
The sister turned around and saw Johnny.
Chi wer wa me na no Joni.
She ran out
Rio.
and swam
Wang.
and pulled Johnny from the water.
Chi charo kwanyo Joni ke pi.
And she started to give her CPR
Chi charo mi no ire kon di no kore.
to get the water out of her lungs.
Wek piu ao. Ke yo bo ne.
And she saved her sister's life.
Chi la ro ko pa Joni yo anoni.
Johnny is still alive today.
Joni futi kwa wa tiem ma lo ko ni.
That accident was in 1969.
Awana ano te me mo le bechel kimia bon wan ke piara bechel we bon wan.
It's 2024.
Wan do te mo le ba rio ke piari wan wan.
Next month in October,
Duma pa ana do chokte.
Johnny turns 75.
Joni no ra ma ka piara ber we be.
75 years old.
Ma ka piara ber we be ko lo.
She is still in her wheelchair.
Futi ga we longa ke kom ma ke lora.
Something I find so amazing is that God used a crab.
Gen ma ke la u
A
ma te.
crab
Do ba tiuk en ku gor me pi ni.
to tell the sister,
Me wa jo ke la men Joni
to warn, and then to save.
ni po wi Joni dak be mi lar kara kwana dong be.
What an incredible God we serve.
Na ke lo ba tiu ja ma ura ko re.
Now, Johnny and Friends
Dong Joni ke lo reme ne.
is in more than 54 countries around the world.
Dong kita ti lo ma
Today.
ramo piara bi biang wan lo bolong.
The programs you see us do, they are all the way in South America,
Yup ene ni ti wai ko ping ma America ba na.
Asia,
Ti lo bo
Europe,
Arab wen ke ti e.
Africa,
Wel chol be ti e.
Central America,
Wa di ko dier ma America ba na.
North America.
Mal ma America.
And that is what God chose to do with a spinal cord injury.
Ene e gena lo ba ke do yero meti mo ne ni wo ke pe ko mo por dinge la men wane.
So we can certainly say that God can use people with disabilities.
Ci dong ada de ne ka ma len waran wai lo ba be ka ram ti ke lo ngolo meti mo je ma do.
If you meet Joni,
Ke ruata ke Joni.
she can't move her arms.
Joni pe rong wer chen ke wan wer chen wan
Her arms will just flop.
chen mere
Shake.
ye ngai ke ne ko ma
Can't feel anything.
pe no ke mo be dong pe wi ke mo
Right? So you can't, it's hard to even shake her hand.
pe be rong wa mo chen Joni chao ne ka wa te re ka ma tu be yen
She can feel from the chest up only.
gena do te ko ko ma cha ke ko ka du ma lo
She's been in a wheelchair for almost 60 years.
kom ke lor ke no ma ka pier bi chel ma ke ti ko lor en ke kom ni
Something that people don't know, unless you follow Joni,
gen ma da pe ram nyang nyo wang e lubo do pa Joni
is that Joni has had breast cancer 2 times.
wo kan sa me chak o ma ko Joni ke rio ko do ko ne
And God healed her.
do ba cha ke rio ni wen ki kan sa ma wang luoro ni
But he has not removed or healed her physical disability.
do ba ke ti me ma pu nyang e chang ko ro pa Joni ni en da ko ja lo pere
Johnny will tell you, I've gone to crusades where I asked for healing at these healing crusades. My healing never came.
ke pe no Joni wa ana chere jiri ma pat to wen ko na lego ni lo ba cha ti dong ko lo pe ti me wa cha wa ni
She prays.
Joni lego be ma tek wa tin
People pray for her.
dano be ne ki lego pe Joni ma tek
God has not removed or healed that disability.
lo ba wa cha wa na furu mo ko ta me o ni Joni be to wi kom ko me no ko nan ke tem pa la ba
And yet, look at what she and her team and ministry have been able to accomplish.
ko nan kong dul pa Joni ki dio ma do ma ki ti ti ma ne vulo ma pat
You see, the thing we have to understand as born again Christians
gen ma mi ro wan nyang wono ma chol jo mo lare
is that sometimes through suffering we can do more.
lo ka ti ki long ma raj ni chao ke ne li mo chan ma liet ti dok wa rom ti mo jo ma do ye be ke nan kong lo ke
Are we together on that?
wan nyang ane we
So move with me now to visual impairments.
dong wa chero wono e lok me nano gwaro ma me nano ma no dano wat ki ye
What we have seen with some pastors is they are a little confused about visual impairments.
gena wan yang ken lo kwan no rwa ta ket gi e gwar me wang gen pen yang ye ma be
If you have a visual impairment, you may not be completely blind.
ke gwar me wa tie chao ke ne te lo ka ne pe wa ta ma pe ram nano
Sometimes a visual impairment may only affect one eye and not the other.
chao ke ne gwar me wang we no we le ko chele ke pe nano ma be a chel no dimo nano ken mai kan
Sometimes it's both.
chao ke na rio wen no pe o guru gi
You can be blind but see light, shadows, figures, and movement.
no i ram nano ge dero ke kita dano woro ke jemi ti me mere ke re
But you may not be able to see color.
eto rang e ma ke wer ma pat ke dong e kele nyime do ngamo do ga ta no pe kon na ro wa nano ne
Sometimes a visual impairment can be corrected with specs.
en ku ri gwar me wang en chao ke ne ke yubo ki mi ne ma rai ke ro mo na ga do chele wang ke mot di mo na lek
Sometimes people use contact lenses.
jo ke
The
ne
lenses, contact lenses.
jo ke ne ke kero ma rai ne ke kero wa yi wa ba pe ru ga ke boyo ke tong wa ko no
Sometimes a visual impairment can be corrected with a simple surgery.
jo ke ne ke ti yao me ma na kwa ni del mo ne ma ta ke la nywa ne ki gibo ti chao di mo me na mo
And some visual impairments cannot be corrected with surgery or specs.
mo ke ne pe yo pe ke kel ma rai magnifying glass a biro pe yo bo yo ke tere yao wen du mer ku meno
It can be the cause of an injury to the eye.
chao ke no re we
It could be that the eye did not develop all the parts that bring in light.
i kar mai ti adon je mo me wa kwa dong wen ma be
It can happen from the environment.
cháu cái này cả mình biết cả bề đi em ấy cái cái phải vậy
Like maybe you put some fluid in your eye that spoiled your eye.
và cái nó mò lúc cái vậy chú cháu chắc qua rồi không
But what is important, especially as pastors,
cho nó biết là tẹt đồng mà cháu lục quát
is that if someone has visual impairment,
cái ngã tới mò thì cái qua mới hoàng cái này gì
what do you think would be a way to help them when they're in church?
thì cháu này mình tìm ngon về cái con cái tí cái này gì
Should we sit them very far away?
và ba cái đồng của bề hoàng nghe biển cái bề là nhím đồng cái param na nó
Or should we allow them to sit a little closer?
cái cái đồng cho cái nó bên mà recommend nào chel cái online cả
It's important that we think about these disabilities when they come to our church.
về tạc này vợ mà cái này lục cái cái này ngồi cái này giờ
There's very easy ways to make them feel welcomed.
ví dụ mà yết mà rong vẹt cái này nghe này cái giờ cái này giờ cái nhau
They might need something printed in larger print.
chỗ cái này cái miếng nó cho mà đỏ mà cái cho cái con cái ya về là điết cái này nó
They might need you to give them the notes or the words to music before they come.
cháu cái này miếng này mi phun mà bị phun nhau còn có quán nó mà bây giờ có đòi online cái nhau
As you heard Mugisha say, they might need help with specs.
một cái này nó cái miếng con mi mà rai à và có rùi hoài
Sometimes they use those things called a magnifying glass.
một cái này cái miếng có rùi mà rai mà qua rồi jam mi
Those are simple ways that we can help people with visual impairments.
mà nó dùng mà yết mà rong còn nhà đa nó mà cái gọi mà hoàng
Now, there's a misunderstanding as well about using Braille.
rồi về tie indian cái này tí cái
Braille is a specialized way that people who are totally blind learn to read and count by touching
tie nhiều mà này
raised dots.
nhiều mà này tie mà cái lục gọi mà hoàng cái nghe cái này tí cái đấy ăn về cụt pan này nó mi ra ôi cụt vai
Not all people, though, with visual impairment use Braille.
bên này lục gọi hoàng quen cái tiêu cái này cái luôn này brand cái level chui lên về pang cái tie
That is something that has to be taught.
mi ra cái phun cái đàn nó
So please don't go out and say, let's go and buy 10 Braille Bibles today.
cái đồng cái cha mày wow which will brand là pa đồng tiền
They may not even know how to use the Braille.
gini ini kar walu kar me wang be ki fun ke me ti kwede
So when we're talking about visual impairment, always ask them, what do they need?
ke ngata mo ti ke gar me wang pe ne ni I me ti kun ni ning
Another thing you see sometimes, you see them walk with a white stick.
mo ke ni ki wor ku do mo ni
Not so.
undo na no jone we
Yes. So think about those people that come inside. How would you accommodate if they had a white stick?
jo mo ne ma ke bo pe ku do ni ke obi ka ni de bi ko ni ning ke tam eno ni
So we need to have good seating for them so they can find their way.
me wanong ka ber ma be mano ke go o ke pe yo ka ta me cha no ka beru
Are we together?
ti ka chel
Now, I won't stay on all of the different types of visual impairments, but go ahead.
pe da be ga ke kom gar me wang ma pat te eto
You know albinos.
nge jo man ma lo ke ni albino ne
You know albinos.
jo ma ke ber cha ke mo na ya no ti chuli ni
You've understood that they have a what? Visual impairment.
jo no gar me wang yelo gi
If you have albinos in your communities or churches,
Unti ke jo ne ka ni ja we jo ana mano ke kom ke beru kwa de no do mo le chuli ma be pe ya o american
you'll need to help them
jo ne mer ke kon ke lok man no
because they have visual impairments.
bien pe o ti wang ge weng
And there's some common visual impairments we know about, like cataracts,
ke pe o mo me wang ma wan wang ge ke jui ma pa dak mero
glaucoma that covers your eyes.
wo wang me re ma yelo wa red eye fu wan pe ra cha che ke kan
I think we know that diabetes can cause blindness.
tu chu ka be ke lo pe ke wang da no
Diabetes can cause damage to the lens in the eye,
chùa chỗ cái đấy cái lúc bẹo lại mà bên này hoàng bẹo bên này làm bè
and their vision slowly goes away.
chính nên nó này cháu đọc của pin nó quay tao
Okay, there are some other ones like river blindness and trachoma.
một cái này tiêm mà pi bê cả mồi lấy quay với những cái cháu nhé này river nó quay chui mà phải đồng là
And then there's the common one. It can happen again from injuries and eye infections.
một cái này tiêm này walk cái red nhiều cái thua mà nó bỏ quay
Are we together?
what tiền nhang quay
Okay, now I want to shift to hearing impairment.
what chơi đôi bẹo mấy ít với nhiều lọc
Okay, I want to shift to hearing impairment and being deaf.
còn mấy ít cái tỏ ít
Now, some of you in this room
vốn một cái nào cái
are young,
phụ được tiền nào
and some of you are starting to show your age,
vốn một cái nào mua cái vũ tí cả nén nó ba tim bu
and you know how you're starting to show your age.
ingé cái tiền nhiều đồ mua cái này cái đấy ini bể cái nhỉ
And what you will find as you age
in đây bên nông mua cái này anh này
is your eyesight and your hearing.
mua cái này
What happens?
mua cái này cả là nhốt đấy yiri cái quay cái ta cái bể là cái đấy tige
Begins to go away. It's not so good anymore.
cái gu cái tiền đọc ở bên bên biết là chia ra này phụ đi đi nó đồ tí cả nhốt đấy này gì rồi
Now you're all laughing,
phụ tiền nhẹ rồi cái này ở vào mà gu
and if you're not laughing, you may have a problem with hearing.
nhẹ rồi mà nó yiri đồ tiền tao này đi bể cái nhỉ
The reason why we're talking about these as well is if God allows you to live for many years,
cái nên là bao giờ ini ri lo vào đó
you are going to experience
ibi niang lo ka watia fonyo ne kombet ni mabe da
a level of suffering.
ibi li me chan ba en ri ni lo ni ba mana kong
Because He has designed our bodies to do what?
lo ba yo ko ma ti mo nga
They start to fail.
lo ba ke yo ke ko wa ne ke ma ka mo no ramo ki chao por ko ken ke chao wa mi ro a ke lo bo
Your muscles become flabby and fatty.
bed wa ma no ngwele tu du mere bello ma kira ji ko ma no chu ri pe gore
We start to develop a tummy.
guru ko wa ne wa no ke ni wa yo lengo kun ba pa loin ba no ti gore ne we ka chok ke
We lose vision and hearing.
nano ba mo kene wano kene po nana be ke luo wa ke dek ya wa ye meno wa ndong pe ko no ya da
Even our organs like liver, kidney, our hearts, they don't work as well.
adono wa chwin wa ku ya be dong ke pe tiu ke no
Have you ever thought about why God designed our bodies this way?
de ta mo pe ngolo ba te ro kon wa rie ku meno
You would think as you age and grow in wisdom, your body becomes better.
i ta mo ni ke rie ko no ti ka mete wi ku mi ro bet ka yu pe mere ma dong ko mete mete mera
But it's the other way around,
er ka ro lung tu ko na dak ti ada
right? You grow spiritually and you mature here and here.
ka ko don lo me chwin ma pu ni me wi ke de ta mo ke ro don wa ke chwini
But everything else starts to fail.
ya mo ke ni gi kwaro ni ango ke cha ko ti ke long
And one of those failures is hearing.
Iken jama wigi wato ti ye yire.
You can be born and not be able to hear.
Kirama nywele ano ire pe winyo loka be.
But you can also lose hearing after birth.
Winyo loka be ramo ruenyo neo kuna no ke nywele mabe ni idi kwa.
A hearing impairment can be in one ear or both.
Gor me winyo lok no be ribut ila ko chele ken nywari o weng.
I always enjoy talking to older, wise people.
en mar lok ke jo mu ti magiriek
You know, the Jajas, the Moses.
kwaro madon ke ada gi mano ya mo korwi magiriek
And they will say, speak into my good ear.
chi gi wechi wen dog yer tu la chu de ti ma be cham dong wi wat ma pada niang wa kwano ke de wen duga
It's
chu
true.
kan no lok
It's
da
true.
lok da no
So you certainly see hearing impairment with age.
chi di tu na na wa da cha ro I lok dog la chu chi di lok ke de ma be
But you also have situations where it's not related to becoming old.
e ta kar mo go be no kar pedano ti e to ket me win lok e duenyo
Right? You can lose hearing due to injury to an ear.
cho ke ne red mon ma ko irio chi iri dingo no pe win lok dong ma be
You can lose it due to infection in the ear.
tuo mo ai ma ko gere iri chi gar me it donya kumi
Sometimes there are bones in our ears that did not develop or form.
cho ke ne chu go mo ne ma ti yit ku de ma no mi ko dango we win lok a be ne no en kwero dang
Something that's important for our pastors.
ja ma pe ki tek pe lo kwat wa e gi ni
If you have people
ke ti ki dano
who have hearing impairments,
ma ke ti ki pe ko me win lok e kanija
how can we accommodate these people in our church?
wa gwa ko ki ni ning we ko win fon ma wa ta ke jo ke ne kanija
Some people
mo ke ne
can
kin
read lips.
pe ki ramo pong lok ke ti kwano del do ki ti ro na ke lok pe niang be
If they can read lips, should they sit in the back
ka ke no
or the front?
niang ke ti ga lok ke do ge mi re ket ga nge ke ke ra nyim
The front.
ana jo mo ke le ga nyim we ko nen do ke ta yeng e kwere
And if you don't know if they can read lips, you ask.
cái pen niang này ngọt thì niang cái tia lok i pen a pen ni cái đàn tia lok thì niang ni cái đó đó cái riêng cái đấy bị pen ba
Now, let's talk about sign language.
còn đâu mà lok còn lok mấy sign language cái đó cái nhuri cái chen
Not all people who are deaf know sign language.
jo mà yết cái đình quen pe cái niang sign ba
So, if you have people who come to your church,
cái đàn mà lấy cái ni ni
please don't go out and bring sign language interpreters into your church and start signing with them without talking to them first.
pe chat mere cái wi pe ni ndoi loy cái ni ja chi nong ngar mà quan sign language chi bien quay là gar man de kan pe win lok bet de bet a nyure sign chung ka anda be chat to jirio
Are we together?
niang we pe cái tim mo
But what we can do is we can learn sign language with them.
yana warang tim wa fonyo sign language ka chel kwet gi
And you both learn how to communicate.
fonye kin wo no niang ni ka a tim che ko man enene no niang ke na wa jo
You know, at Africa Renewal University, we teach sign language.
university me african renew fonyo ben sign language ti ko no
Even online.
kiri wa nyo pa mo ma pe charo wa gang kwan rwa ka la fonyo yamo
Pastors, you can learn sign language.
kwa din me fonyo sign language ba
And your volunteers and other pastors, they can also learn sign language.
ke jo mo ko ma ti ke ka ni ja be me ro fonyo sign language
For those communities where there is a lot of need for sign language interpreters,
pe kamano ke mer ni dan mo kwano ti ki sign language be ri ye
then you bring them those sign language interpreters, but only if you need them.
irao pango gi ke ni a de ne gi met ta ke nyu
But now, what if sign language is not working and lip reading is not working?
Yes,
Now,
I
what
know.
do you do?
sign language be dong pe ti ga ti mo ne ma ke yeo ke dok chi dan nyang ne wen kwar ti chu dong wa ti mo no ngo
People who have hearing impairments are oftentimes ignored
jo ma ke tiu dia ne ba pol ka dao ja le pe ge o
because we don't know how else to communicate.
pian no dong be po nge ke me wa lok kwet gi kwere
There are ways we can use pictures,
kon wa ti ge yo mo ko chao ti ti chal
we can write,
kon be wa ra mo cho cho gi kwano
we can use videos,
wa ra tu chi chi ne ma gi na no gi nyang be ma be
social media.
Wa tiu ke nyo pa mono.
You can even use YouTube.
Irama chwala ke YouTube ki charo niano jami.
So there are multiple ways to accommodate and disciple people with hearing impairments.
Wa tege yo ma pola ta ma warama gwa ke jo ne kanija wa dak ben wa fonyo ki digulu ti pala ba ma beje kanija wa.
The final thing I want to talk about are hearing aids.
Gen ma ge ma be lo yene gen ma konyo wa mi winyu lok kanen gor mi winyu lok tie.
Not all people with a hearing impairment can use a hearing aid.
Pe dano dunyo ma tege gor me yit ramo ti ke nyo en ma kuni we ge win lok ke.
You must get them tested first.
Mir kon ke che pim gor me yit enoni we ke nen ke ramo ti ke nyo pa mono.
So please don't go out and purchase hearing aids and give them to the people without talking to them first.
Pe di chen me tu we lu mere genan me konya dan winyu lok ke. Bine di le yit gi kat gene yire be kuni jiri be chakao ma pi be lo wa ke ngate ane.
We have seen that happen.
Wadan ke lo kwan mo ge ke timo ne ge ta mi kon ma ta da de kanija.
And then it didn't help
Ti no be pe me wa kon mo.
because the person could not use a hearing aid.
Yen ngate be ne pen yang be pe nge ke me ti ke gen ma konyo dan winyu lok ke.
Okay, now I want to do one short activity.
Umer wa tim gena chiel ma binan ka maleng kai.
I want you to get a piece or sheet of paper, a blank piece of paper.
Non ka tai mo ma pe ki choy mo ki ken.
So use a separate part of your notes.
Ti ki vut ke anone ma pe ki choy ye.
You need a writing pen.
Non ka la
Or
mo chi
pencil.
nyol kalo.
Okay, if your neighbor needs someone, just rip out a piece, give it to them.
Ke nan jere ne te mer ka tai ma ye no ye je mi ne.
Okay, for this activity, I'm going to ask you to draw or sketch a dog or a puppy.
Chao kana be pe ne go chel la te no kur mo. Nyo kwok mo ma kere be ma te gang.
But I am going to walk you through the steps.
Eta be wechi ka kwe mo miri gwelining ini beta winyo ne ba.
So you can't just start sketching without listening to my instructions each time.
Pe cha gon chel me la wa chel ma pe winyo ngo ma wa chi tim me.
Are we together?
Wa ti atara
Okay, so do you have your pen?
kalam te
Ready?
chi atara
You have your piece of paper there?
ka tai be tie.
Okay, now my friend in the back on the slides, just keep the slide there. Don't change it.
Omera pe cho slide te ba wa chung kwenyo.
Okay, now before we go, I have one last step. You must keep your eyes completely closed.
Mo kana
So
dong.
close your eyes.
Me weo ti ke yir ke ken me gon chel mo be wa cho ne.
So make sure you know where your pen and paper is before you close your eyes.
Ket ka lamio u chung di ka te chi ma put pe me we.
Now, as I give you instructions, you're not permitted to open your eyes whatsoever during this activity.
Ka rok ta do ere indi gor mere chara ma pi ele we.
So keep your eyes closed for the next 2 minutes.
Kong di tim be me na we o pe da ka ri o.
Okay, let's begin. Draw for me a big round circle.
Go sa kol mo ma de te ka tai ma i ka re ka lamine.
Okay, now you should have done that. Now make for me 2 small circles.
Da go cha kol ario ma tiano ene nya cha kol ni anu ni.
Outside the big circle.
Angene pimo keta dit kere go dong ke wa. Cha kol ario ma tiano. Outside mo na ma dit te go ma tiano.
Yeah, you're going to draw for me those eyes.
Mo dong ini be go ario cha kol ma tiano ario.
And now, in those 2 small circles, make me 2 more small circles.
Isa kol ene da go sa kol mo yigi ke isa kol ma wa ne. Ket kalam ye da go sa kol ma tiano ario ye.
So you have to give your eyes those dots.
Well, bet charo gimo ma chol charo gino mo ma te bolde.
Now, After you do that, your dog or your puppy needs a nose.
Ingeo guak ke tigang pa miro bet la bo hume wa be go guak.
Make for me a nose inside that big circle.
Wan dong chio ke wa ho pe go yireo di be go hume e sa kol.
Okay, now, after you've made me the nose, please make your dog a mouth.
Ingeo guak mar cham che dong ke nen hume dong tie men ngwe je rani ke ngong ke ni. Dog
So-
miro tie tie me cham.
So maybe some lips and a tongue.
Ram kon del dog guak ma leng ke kat le be wa nang ke pi.
Okay, and now that we're still working on our dog or our puppy,
Kita cara go no guak ni la te guak fut go che te meta nyime.
okay, now you need to finish shaping the dog's face.
Wang guak ke be ke leng ma be ma no ke ina tu ke nan la te guak man le da.
So you need to draw another very big circle
En ti me ke nan da ke go sa kol mo ma da ko luar sa kol ma na ka ne go ni.
around everything, those eyes, the nose, a big circle.
Go sa kol mo din ma do luar je mai go ki ni weng beri ye.
But now your dog needs ears. Otherwise, he can't hear.
Pe dong mir kat yire.
Draw for me 2 ears on your dog.
Go it go ario e kom sa kol ma dit ma in go ke nge ni. Tu ke yar yit go ko ma dit ma do ti serious.
And now maybe you want to touch up your sketch. So whatever else your dog is missing, without opening your eyes, finish sketching your puppy.
Chao kan mo
Maybe
ber
he needs some fur or some color.
chao kan mo ber ka ri ka gena ka runu de cha ne de go ke do ben ma leng. I ram wer le me wer le ben ma leng ma de ma ke nan ko i tu ting now.
So by now you should have finished sketching your dog. So go ahead and open your eyes and see your beautiful dog.
De ya buen nen ke de ke la ti kur ni do chao ani. Go wang go ka de ko na. Do ke gi ume ge ri.
Does it look like a dog?
Gene go ne
Well
cha la ti
done.
kur.
Now for my friends on the slides, if you could change the slide to the very end, you can see the dog that I drew.
Ya ke te kong we ke nen chel go ma ke go ni. Ki dan po ke ma ke go.
This is how I was instructing you,
Nan ke ta be mi urok cha me go ke re we.
but some of you didn't view it like that.
Munu ke ne po nan ka mo
Yeah,
yi
right there.
Nan
Right?
ke
Your dog may not look like that.
wo ke no mi bet ku ma yan.
Good.
Foi lo ba ke to go ke re go ke wo.
Now, some of you are going to probably ask, what was the point of this activity? And I think you know some of the reasons as to why we chose to do that.
Uno ke na ramon yang pe nga wa ke go chel go uno ke te pe ne pe ngo tin ke wa go chel kur ma ti ko man.
So now, what we are going to do,
Ke na dong wo bet ti me cha wa ne.
I'm going to just request for Pastor Ben, do we know if lunch is ready?
La kwat Benjamin
Ben will come back and talk to us.
ke chera ni an ke dek chok ti bi wa che wa bi kwi le wa kwi la ba.
So right now on the schedule, we will go into some short question and answers.
Wan nong wa chok cha roi ken gam la pen ke pen la pen be do.
So for anybody that has a question,
Ngate mo ti ken mo ma gwak ti ke la pen ma ba.
this could be about the sessions,
Au be re phone ma wa phone ni.
could also be about maybe a question about disability.
Ni mer pen la pen ma kwa ko lo kom ngol ma pat pat ma ti ke ni ja wa.
If you do have a question, you can just raise your hand.
La pen mo ke ken ma kwa ko lo kom ngol nyo gar ma ti ke re nyo phone ma ki phone ni. Chao na eh. Ilchi,
Oh, yes.
dam to yilchi ngik kuja. Me gumbe yilchi kenyo. Dari omado yilchenge.
The lady in the very back.
La men wat yang ngik kacha.
Okay, this gentleman.
On yer do chare.
Yeah.
There is a microphone there.
Gilora chel kite word kere. Omen was Steve to maro gilora chel. Nan cha donge yabo ge wang tia teach.
Thank you so much.
Ofo eto twal.
By names, I'm called Francis Willie Okwi.
Nye kiluoni Okwi William Francis.
I'm a pastor from Family Miracle Church,
Enti la kwat. Kanija makuloni Family Miracle Church.
actually standing in for my senior pastor who is not around, and he delegated me to come here.
La kwat ma mega yo chwale me chunka ka en.
I have maybe just a few, like 2 concerns.
Tameti ario.
One,
Ma chel.
as I know, there has been a gap in disability ministries.
Angene wano warem to twal ikiremeti kelo gore mapat.
This one we can accept or deny, but this is a fact.
Kono wa mera nyo wadege manti loka daba.
One is, this is a move that will require not only those who are inside here,
What enepe mera wan mauti at kanye ki can.
but more than the team that are inside here.
Eta mera dan ma pul makara dul mo gore enin.
If we can be availed with the equipment on a soft copy, would help us to equip those who are at our various churches,
Kano kram mina wa not se fon enin no bu konya wa chera fonya jo kene kanija wa.
because it would help us
Yan no bi konya wa.
internalize as, again, actually as facilitators with our various ministry level. That's what my one
No
concern.
bi konya wa dok tij wa ma wa te tiye kanija wa na ma tek.
And at some point of the session, we heard that Joni and friends are partnering with disability ministries and Christian fraternity, if identified.
Wanyang ni Joni and friends gitiyu ki kanija mati ke lugaro ye kenen la kwadong no lugore mati kanija gini.
Is there an extension that can be done to those disabled people? Talk about the wheelchairs, maybe the hearing aid, if it is diagnosed that they need those things.
Ke dong ati ke la gara kanija na ma meru kom nyo mer ge it me winyo loke. Joni man roma minu kon eno ni
Those are my 2 concerns. Thank you so
mero
much.
tama eno kate ke ka chel dong ti la pen mere ma mera gama.
I think let's address him first and then we'll go to the other gentleman.
La men wa mo no chungcha.
Oh,
For matek dano dujo
Thank you so much everyone.
nia keluon la lam Florence
Her name is Lam Florence.
ake Favor of Christ Ministry and Restoration.
The name of the church is Favor of Christ Ministry and Restoration.
Ana me peño la peñman
She asked a question.
tie ngolo mo kene
There are other disabilities
ma bino pian ngat mo otuo malet
that come through prolonged illness,
to twale chalo to it
most especially ear impairment
ma lupe ki tuo ma keluoni hotel talk
that comes as a result of meningitis attack.
ke mo kene pe anyo
Others as a result of measles.
Sidong la peña tiene mokene to wang malobo condition malobo lock and tuo mokene enone
Others are blindness that follows those kind of illness.
dong le kana tiene partner ene ke ramo konyo wa ke jimi mokene mano wa ramo timo ase mena no kere jone enone wa kwa nge ngolo maketi kere.
Can this Joni and Friends partnership help us on the best way to identify those disabilities and how to help them?
Mena ela peñ mo wera malo me penyo ne.
That is our question.
Before Yesu Kristo,
Praise the living God.
ani au kor jole jo.
His name is Okot Jolly Joe
Aki kumiri ches kona ke lata pade.
from Konakilak Pade.
Ke kona ticharo elder.
He's an elder in the church where he's fellowshipping.
Che la kwata wacha bian a win fon an.
He's representing his pastor.
Atike la pen ma chiar bor wa ko duju ya ga dok sia facilitate mo gisa.
I have a question that will attach to everybody.
La pen si kuman wan wangeo ni lo ngode ken gang wangeo gi bene.
We know all the disabled people in our communities and our churches,
Erwa luor chiar bor gi.
and we fear reaching to them
Pian gen tiki mir mi gumme ba ke mi gi.
because they have interest in help, physical harms.
Chuan ma pege kon an we ko chwal bor gi.
And most time we don't have those things to give them.
Chua tiki luor wa chiar bor gi won gi pen gi mo chi dong pe o bor gi pian gen bo pen yan beni pe gen mere mi.
So we pastors, we are scared to reach them because most time we are empty-handed, and if we reach them, there is no any visible help we can give them.
Si dong da pen ti ara ngome wa ko o ke bor gi be ger ko nong la eno ne be ro.
I'm now asking Joni and friends, what other ways can we use to reach those people so that they also receive our gospel? Because we know they are material-oriented.
Thank you.
I'm going to hold it there, and then we can respond to these three, and then we'll continue with the questions. Before we forget, we are also aging.
We were willow.
So the very first question from my brother over there, he talks about the material that we are training, if we can share it. The answer is yes. However, you clapped very hard. However, we are going to share the material through Pastor Martin. Through electronically through this very church. Because as we share this material, it is important that for the person who's going to share it to the next person, you are sharing it in the right understanding and the right way. So Pastor Martin and the team will be deciding on how they can share the material and how best we can all use it. Because we want to be able to package it well. For us and the two brothers there, we have fully trained and certified to teach it. So we want to make sure that any other person who uses the material has the actual understanding of how it is supposed to be taught to the next person. So we'll approach Pastor Martin and the team, and they'll be able to share the material. And your second question was about equipment. Partnership. You see, I'm already aging. Yes.
Dong la Kristai no chera oriat ke no ne wan garo yire garo ma wa war ga na tie jone ke lo remani don ramo ke lo gin nan ko men nene we do ko ngate we kanija na ka kama ake ye la penye eno. So
I'm also going to answer that. The answer is yes.
Dagama nyir beni iyo.
However, within our means as Joni and friends.
Dago mero wieni malo bage care pa Joni and friends.
I talked about the 5 ministries that we have here.
Fonya doctor ja bij makite timone.
And as you've seen, we've not come with wheelchairs to give out.
Be yada ina ne kom palongol mo bion ke pe.
We came with the most important program of equipping you with the knowledge that he has a biblical background.
Opinion to twala ki ngej me ne wo we obet ki lok paloba makwa ko kom lugaro matika ni jawa.
But as we go further in partnership with the FCC and Pastor Martin and Guru Bible Church,
Kanan wa mete wo kenwa ka chel ke FCC ki Gulu Bible Community Church mano wa donya mature.
we'll have programs also coming here like Wheels for the World program that gives out wheelchairs and walkers.
Chi yup me na mangwen ya bij mo ne makeloi ni wheels ni mano ke poko ye come wang dong donya ye.
And all the other programs.
Ke yum mo kene make wai ne ki tim ni wang donya ke nan wot ka chel te meta nyim.
But we roll them out in a very sensitive manner or sensitive way that people do not think that the equipment is more important than the word.
Watiyu kikini yo mabe da yo menya da wek dana pa da hoten machado nyonyo mawami ne pere tek loy lok palo bao.
I hope I've answered you well.
Atiki biak na gamo lagami ka kare.
And Mom had a question over there.
Me go ben pe la pen machel ki lokom mi kon.
Further explanation. Yeah. So for Madame's question, there are other disabilities that can come from health conditions. I talked about some.
Wallo ko lokom kwaro maramo nonge ni woke tuo malet mangada mono donye ye.
I talked about diabetes.
Cha tuo skaire gi eno.
Particularly the ones that you find here in Uganda.
Kom tuo ne neno makati Uganda kan.
So we have things like diabetes,
Jam cha tuo chukaire.
high blood pressure,
Tuo pressure.
polio.
Tuo kwea.
Polio, there are vaccines for,
Polio ki ramo gwer dano chi dong pe maro.
but there are still outbreaks.
Kiri bede food poro gere.
If you watch the news, they are now starting to have an outbreak in Israel, in Gaza, with polio.
Polio ke wanano news wanane tia poro I Gaza kamalwen te matek yene.
So the other health condition especially is when there is high poverty, war, and bad sanitation.
Pero mo kan tia ke nan lwen te matek chan ke leo me ka bermone peti mabe.
And very crowded conditions.
Si kamano dano gwara ka chel mano dano dila.
When you have those happening at once,
Ke nan kino te timeol la wan chel.
you'll see sicknesses and disabilities coming out.
Ina tuo mapat ke gori. Cha ko nyote ko pa dano.
So we talked about polio.
Lo ko makwea.
There is, meningitis.
Ke tuo
For
tel
us,
tok. Meningitis tel tok.
for us, there's called the meningitis belt. Like the belt that wraps around you.
Del me tuo tel tok.
In Africa, there's the meningitis belt around the equator.
Tunge kwata kwaya tie del mag wane del me tuo tel tok.
And meningitis, especially if it goes to the brain,
Tel tok ka ugura dam.
that can cause visual impairments, hearing impairments, and intellectual disabilities.
Tao balu widano ke lo gor me winyilok wa ke gor me neno be.
And another very common one that people they have shame is sexually transmitted infections.
Gor mo kene madonyo kom dano gor mo ma wok ke yo me buro ma dano luoro lo ke yene ano ko ne wok ke buro.
Herpes, syphilis,
Nying tuo chalo syphilis ge ano.
gonorrhea,
Nyai jan.
warts, not diarrhea, but gonorrhea.
Nyai ge mo ma pa dong kanya.
And sometimes women don't even know they have it.
Charo tuo ego ne mo no kaya na pengen ne en dong ke tiko chile wa ke mo a chel.
They give birth and they transmit to their child.
En upo na tuo no ko ba kom la ten.
It's a serious issue.
Lo ke pere tek kuna un luo lo ke ye ne marai.
And it can even lead to visual impairments,
Tuo charo nyai gini ke na ri kume char te ne ko wa.
complete blindness because she wasn't treated.
Dan wa ta de be pian po no yat marwata ke melwenye kom tuo ne.
And I could actually go on and on about the other conditions that exist.
No,
But those are
Ramadok, yeah.
very common here in Uganda.
Tuo ego ne gitima duo Uganda kain.
And most STIs are treatable and you can be fully cured after medicine, except for a couple of them that are permanent.
Tuo en ma ko ke burne no
Like
por ka ke
herpes.
no ya chango ke ne charo ya chan.
And then, of course, we know HIV and AIDS can also lead to disabilities.
Me go chele ma wa luo ne en ben ke wa ke lo garo ke na ri komi.
And I would also say we know about sickle cell. It's a very common one. It's a blood disorder.
Sickle cell mano wa re mo komi oni be ti ma duong.
Sickle cell is debilitating for people because some people don't even have the strength, physical strength to walk to get their medicine.
Sickle cell tuo ne tek to tuan mano ke lo garo me charo yat ke jo ma ti tuo na yela.
And I'll also say the newest one we see is COVID.
COVID be do nya ke mege ma tek ada da ma dan we nge COVID-19 ma be ada da pe ke boka boka.
You know that COVID has left some people disabled.
Nge ko ver we lu ngora bo dong ba ko na yo karna.
Anyways, there's a long list that can lead to disabilities.
Ti tuo ma duong ma ramo ke lo gare kume ke nenu mari.
All right, so I want to as well respond to the elder over there that he made a very bold statement.
Ye lo lo mo me tek twin ma wono ke ne pe no to er lo
But
ko ne.
it shocked me a little bit because as a person, if I have a problem
Yen ke charo anti ki per mo.
and the government cannot help me,
Siga mente per mo konya
the police cannot help me,
wa bilibe gi weya.
the final place for me to get help
Ka ber ma gikke me no kon dong
is the church.
kanija.
It should be the first
Un emir ben na mo
and
ko.
it should be the final.
Dak ma gikke be
So, pastors, I want to encourage you
lo kwara mira chok twin wo.
that you are the ones with the answers.
Wono yo tike lo la gam.
If I come to the church and the church doesn't have answers for me,
Ka bine kanija chi patwa no la gam ke ye.
I'm as good as dead.
Aroma dong ki ngato tayo.
Because the final answer is in this right place.
Bien la gam ma gikke me ko dujo dong ti kanija.
So as you go to these families and these places,
Ka ber ma chere ye bor lo gore ikin gang ku jani dong.
be equipped with the word. That's the most important thing.
Biata ke lok palu ba mo ma tek lo wa te kar pa ngati yo chet kere kuno.
And now when you equip yourself with the knowledge about disability,
Ka di ngi lo kom garo ke lok palu ba wa jo kwere.
you might not be the person who physically helps that person,
Iram be ni pe gi gen ma komen nen me kon la gar ne.
but because you're informed,
Era pien ngi ti mo ram wiu kuji.
you know where to refer the person.
No e tiki kamera mo chi mo ne wer la garo chen non kon ma en meta ki kuno.
So you'll know where the hospitals are and where the other organizations are.
Ngi
That
dul
can
ma ram
help.
mi ne kon ngi orian ma era no ye kon en kunyi.
But as it is our policy, and we are trying our level best,
Wa ti ga yele ki kar wa wen.
that as we equip churches with this knowledge,
Ka wa miyo kan nija ngi ke lo kwat ngi ma pat egini.
we bring as long other services
Nana wa tiene jam mo ko mapir tek be wakel
that can help them as well reach out to people with disabilities.
wa ko kon gi kermeti ki jo matiki ngolo nyo ko arma pat community gi.
And indeed, as you said, Elder, that if we only do in word and not in deed, we are basically doing nothing.
Kita chale wa ke ni lok dog no kon jo ne ki ngiu lok me kon kom ki kom me dong pero gina konye pe ne ti lok da gere.
As you build these communities or disability ministries,
Kenen wa chung ki jo ne
and as your congregations come on board,
manolo Kristo ni be gi ripe kwere me chung kwere
you start small.
ku chak matere
What are those small things, or see what we think are small things?
ngomon ma wataw ne tire ni
But as we can do as an entire church
ma ke wati mu ma chala kanija
for that one family with disability.
be dogang manola gati yene
So provide the small things within your means,
gena mutu ya timene chala kanija ma rom no no go doge
but make sure you do not scare away from sharing the word of God.
nene ke umio gena ene pa wi bu wil ki nywa ko lok palo ba
As I read, the Bible says, compels us.
ke wani bible ene ye birwa
It is our duty that even if we go there and they say go away,
be do ti jo ker be wa chal ko wa ao
we go back the next day
wa char ruam mo kana
and the next day.
ak wa mete
So work amongst yourselves as a team, as a church, as a congregation,
urip kingu ma chalo kanija
and partner with others. As you have seen, we have started a partnership here.
uchung ke jo kana chalo wa chako ke gulu bible kanye
So partner with other organizations that are working with disability-related issues.
dok ti mo kana ma konya lo gar ne un ma chalo kwat beno o ti ke gi ka che
So that as you provide the spiritual aspect of it,
wa ka in la kwat do mi ko mi lo me chuin
they can provide the physical aspect of
dok
it.
ti ano ni gendong mi me ko mi
I want to ask Ben whether we are ready for lunch. Okay, please.
I wanted to add to our friend here,
na mer mai to ko lok pala dit en ma ti elda kanija ne
and many of you might have had the same question as him.
uno kana be la penyo go be wi wo chalo kitando penyo ma winyo ne
Now, I know there are many community churches here within the FCC. Not so.
angai community churches duong kan under FCC
How many of you have your mercy ministries developed?
un ma di ken kanija me FCC na ma ti ki dok ti me ki ja
You know mercy ministry. I know you know if you're an FCC mercy ministry.
dana di ma ti ki dok ti me ki ja ke cha mo ne me mi ko bon lo gara kanija ni kai hin la FCC ya da
If you don't know what our mercy ministry is about,
onge lo ko mas ministry da we
stand up if you're in FCC and you have a mercy ministry. Stand up.
ama de chua ke de ti bu ke dok ti me mi ko nya kanija wu ke a ke FCC ma an be ti ye ne
So, these guys that are standing up, you need to get their contacts.
jo an mo chung ne we ro mo ko ni nong na ma chim ge
And we need more training.
dok mo mer fo nya mo ramo be mete ku mete
And these are your peers and your brothers and sisters in the Lord who can guide you and help you develop.
mando luogi wu ma ke unu ri packet gi gawa na chim gi rom ko nyu me chung ma be
For us at Gaba Church, we do our stuff through our mercy ministry with Pastor Prosperity.
gaba be na gi ti dok ti me mas ministry
We don't have a lot of funds, but we have people who are willing.
wa pe gi chana ma dir dok ti er wa ti gi dana ma gi ti ga rima ke miri
And there is power in numbers more than material.
te go ti wel dano ma lo ngo jem ma kom gi nena wa ti kwerne
Are we together?
wa ti ka chen
I'm telling you.
te wa chune
What we have found in our community in Gaba,
gen ma wan yang ke ken luak ma gi le ge gaba kuja
you know where Gaba Community Church is? It is in a slum with witchcraft.
jo ne dok ti palo ba ma gaba ne gi ti teng nam ma lu tiat be pole ye ba
And with drunks
wa ti ke lo mer ko no ka ber ma be na dan mo lo no na
and drug users.
jo ma ge mar wa jae gi ti kunu
And there is disability there.
lu ngoro be ke lu gar gi ti kunu
And you want to know what has been the most empowering thing that we do in our community?
inge gen ma dong wa tim ma per tek kunu de en bo jo ego ne
We go to their homes and visit,
wa chero wa limo gi wa gang
sometimes without anything.
cho ken la bon gi mama wa ma ka ching wa be
We have weekly prayer visits to families with disabilities.
wa ti gi yub ma di cha bet weng no ne a chel wa ber ka le ga pe do gan wa wor wa chero e gan pa dano
And now those families are coming to Gaba Church.
en jo e ni weng dong gi bino ka le ga ba
And they were not coming before
no kun chon ki pe le go ba
because they didn't have their needs met
yan
physically.
ngate mo mo chero wa ta ket gi pe ke
But when they started coming in their dirty clothes,
e dong ko chero bien ma no bon gi be chola ta
they became transformed,
ku bien ko ko la ka ki kanija
even in their disability.
kere bere mo kai no lu garo
We have seen more impact in spiritual care than we have even in physical material things.
wa na du ke ma don ke nen wa ko dano don i twin ma karo je me kom
And we know that they need things.
wa ngi
We
be
know
ni
that.
ki mi ru kon me je me kom me gere
We are fully aware and we know we can't meet every physical need of all of our families.
ko ro mo chup dong mir pa dano wen ka chile chile gan wen
We even have families that are living in the lake water.
ko ti do gan mo ma ki ko pi
Their homes are literally surrounded by Lake
no
Victoria.
pi po ka gi er ki ko gere dong me no be
And they're in serious poverty.
ma no chanti ma let ko no
We can't meet all their needs, but we know that they know who Jesus Christ is.
wa ngi no po ro ko ni ki ku er wa ngi ni gi mir ye tu ma lo ko
And we know when God takes them, we know where they're going.
pen ke dong lu ba kwa ni gi no wa ngi a nyim gi ka ma ti ye
Are we together?
wa ti ka chen
There is power in suffering and lack.
te ko tie e dano chan te ko tie be ko ma no jam rem
There is.
Te ko
Now,
tie.
one final thing I want to say,
Yes.
especially to the pastors,
Yen ma gi ka ma mi ra wa bol lu kwat
is we have a session called advocating.
wa ti ki fu nya mo ma ke lu ni kir mi lok pe dano
It's tomorrow.
di ki
One thing we have seen is pastors are not aware on how to advocate
an yang ni lu kwat ki pe ngi kir mi lok pe luak gi bod dul ma ra mo ko ni luak gi
for the person with the disability.
to twale jo ma ti ki ngolo
So Mugisha was talking about knowing the resources around you.
mo gi so bi fu ni lo ko ngi no jo ma ra mo ti kere ma ti ka ma ni ti ye ne
That means that's a part of advocation.
eno ti kien kir mi lok pe luak
So an example is, who is the representative for persons with disabilities right in this village?
charo ka
Do
na
we know
pe
the person's name?
anga mon ma chung pe lu garo e go ans kwata kan ke ne a pe ni ni anga nga ma chung pe lu
Does
garo
anybody know?
ngara mo
For
ngi
this village.
ke ni ai area kan ngi yo ngara chung pe lu garo kan
If you don't know,
te dong pe
write
ni
it down in your notebook. You need to know who your local person is.
cho
That's advocating.
cho
You've understood.
ene ko ni kere me ba ko doge pe
So-
dong kon
Your villages, where you're from, you must know the representative of persons with disabilities by name and number.
ngar ma chung pe lu garo e char ma i ya ye ne nge nyeo ke na ma chi me be
And if you don't have one, you go to the next village and find the person who's nearest.
ke pe re pa res ma ti ye ne chat ka mo ke ne pa res ke ne nong nying nga te ne
Also, who are your education officers for your district?
nga mon ma lo lo kom fonye
You have an inclusive educator office given by the government for your districts.
nga ma lo kom fonye district ma megi itiki na ma chi me nge nye
If you don't know who it is, you need to go and find out.
ka pe ni ngeo ba mi ngeo pien yo e go ne yo me ba ko dog pe lo ma ke kwana ka nija
Who's your officer for labor and gender equality and social development? You have one for your district.
nga ma lo
If you don't know who it is, find out.
ka pe ngeo nga lo kom ti district wo mir na na ma chi mo beru buri
Also, who are your local health officers for your villages?
nga ma mi o ko yot e char mo ti ye ne ke mi te kon mo ke na ma chi ma ti kere
So there is power in knowledge in knowing these things.
ta ko ti nge ba ke nge no je mo ti wa chan
And I also encourage this.
a cho ko chin da ne
If you don't have your MP's contact, you better have it, and they need to know you by name.
ke pe ke na ma chim pa MP ni mi rebet
If
kwen
you are a pastor
ke in la kwat
or an elder
nyo in la te la kanija
or you're discipling people,
nyo in fo nyo lwa
your politicians need to know who you are.
la chung wi bie area u mi ro nge in
Are we together?
wati ma be kan yang
Don't allow these politicians to fear the local church. We must have good partnerships with them.
wa bir ke wat ma be ke la chung wi bie ku nge kanija pa ku bet duo me o kanija wa
Because when they need to reach out to people like you, they are lacking those contacts.
bien ke mer wa ta ke ru no be na ma chim u pe bot ge be ge pe nge u
Are we together?
wati ma be
That's advocating for those families that you may not have those things for.
John ana ke ramo lok pe do gang mo ne ma in pi ramo konya ge ke jam ma kanija ti kere ne
But they might be able to help get that for those families.
lu chung wi bie ne ke ramo no yo mo ke konya do gang e no in la kware ku pe ket ge
Are we together?
wati ka chen
Let me invite Mr. David to come and direct us on how we are going to have our meals. Thank you so much.
Dong ching la kwat dauri dong tia bena romo mala mal lok me o joga.
Wow, let's clap our hands again
Foi
to
dan ke dong
appreciate
ching
this wonderful session.
pe foi man ma pe atake.
Thank you so much for giving us these details information.
Foi u mi ne wa foi man ma tura de dane.
We realize that we have part of the people we are ministering to them, and some of them we are not.
Wa niang ka ma leng ne vudan mo wa tia